Hi guys, this is Hirosaki. This story is all about what if Naruto was a gamer between dimensions. When a boy wakes up in the world of Naruto with no memory of the past, foggy memories of the future, and a convenient gamer-like ability, so what's he to do? The only option is to get stronger and move forward. Before we start, kindly like and subscribe to this channel, and look over the description box for the author of this amazing storyline. Welcome aboard. Chapter 4. Day 90. Ping. Daily Quest Alert. Training Arc 2. Your beautiful but sadistic teacher is training you in combat and wants to see you improve in your skills. Show her how fast you can improve and try to land something on her. Objective 1. Manage to land at least one hit on Komodo. Objective 2. Make Komodo use substitution at least once. Objective 1. Reward, 500 EXP, plus 1 stat point. Objective 2. Reward, 1000 EXP. Failure, you may die on the field. Do you accept? Y/N. I grimaced under my mask before turning to face my adversary. Komodo was dressed in some of her umbu clothing. She had the sleeveless black shirt, gloves, dark pants, and shinobi sandals down, but she lacked the typical gray flak jacket, metal arm guards and ninja pouches that an umbu would typically wear on the field. Ever since day 31, Komodo had begun training me on hand-to-hand combat. She didn't teach me a style or anything, but just how to fight and handle herself, and every day since then, I had received this quest. I believe it goes without saying that I fumbled a lot and did not manage to hit her even after 40 days. More irritating was the fact that I knew she was significantly holding back to try and match my speed and strength, but that did nothing to change the vast difference in skill and experience. It wasn't until recently that I had managed to actually land a hit on her. It did pretty much no damage. And I got beat soon after. But I had completed part 1 of the quest, so I supposed it was alright, more so since she hadn't been upset about my lack of skill. I hadn't had any before anyway, so she simply encouraged me to do better. You're distracted again. A voice said behind me, causing me to instantly take a leap forward to distance myself and turn to see Komodo looking at me unamused. She's fast. Try not to let your thoughts wander, she stated before getting into a loose stance. Come. I shook my head from any distractions and carefully looked at her poise. It looked like she had openings, and she did, but she was purposefully opening up her guard for me. I knew that it would be hard to exploit that opening, but I had to try. I focused my gaze. The rustling of the leaves signaled our fight. I quickly threw a kunai from my pouch and watched as she nearly tilted her head to dodge the projectile. It impacted the tree behind her, so I rushed up to her, another kunai in hand. She watched as I got closer, and it wasn't until I had jumped up to her face level and swung the weapon that she decided to slightly move. She leaned back at the blow, causing my attack to hit air and leaving my still airborne body wide open. She instantly capitalized with a sharp upper kick aimed at my abdomen, but with great flexibility, I tucked my knees into my chest and the kick instead impacted the soles of my feet. I used the upward momentum of the attack to propel myself upwards, allowing me to see her impassive gaze below. I strapped the kunai to my side and got out 10 shuriken from my pouch and crossed my arms against my chest, 5 throwing stars in each hand. In a fluid motion, I released them from my possession and watched as they flew towards the ground. They were thrown in a way that Komodo would have little room to maneuver or dodge. Without so much as a pause, she jumped and gracefully grabbed 2 of the throwing stars in midair, then quickly threw them. They impacted the other projectiles, causing them to ricochet away from her, and some even flew back towards me. I stood on a tree, parallel to the ground, and used the kunai strapped to my waist to deflect the 3 stars that had come my way. Suddenly, my danger sense screamed at me to dodge, to which I quickly reacted and jumped off the tree just in time for an attack shatter the trunk of the plant. Komodo landed on the ground after kicking the tree in half and looked at me appreciatively. At least your instincts are satisfactory. No more words were said as she rushed towards me and used her longer reach to twist her body and throw a sharp right kick aimed at my ribs. I quickly ducked and used the opening of her missed attack to thrust the kunai and my hands upward towards her outstretched attacking leg. In an impossibly smooth motion her feet, which had been pointed parallel to the ground, turned upwards at a 90-degree angle and became perpendicular to the ground. With this position the dropped her heel downwards aimed at my left shoulder, while my right knife-holding hand was poised to strike. I could hit her, but I would lose my shoulder in the process. I quickly abandoned my attack by jumping forward, hearing the crack of the earth behind me as Kodo's heel impacted the ground. I rolled and stood up on one knee while glancing at my teacher. I needed to find a way to distract her for just a single second, so I thought for a moment before deciding a course of action. This entire time, I had been restricted. It was to obviously aid in my strength growth while training. However, I could use this to my advantage. All the tricks I had used in the past would most likely not work on her the same way they had before. With that, I looked behind my teacher, towards the tree where the first kunai I had thrown was lodged. Unknown to my teacher, hopefully, I had attached an extremely thin piece of ninja wire to my first kunai. With all the movements I had made around her, the wire was also now on the ground around her, so I lightly twitched my fingers and pulled hard. Immediately, the wire on the ground made itself known and began to quickly wrap itself around Kodo. My teacher looked marginally surprised, so I used this brief moment of distraction to run towards her as quickly as I could. With a kunai in my other hand, I swung it as fast as I could towards my immobile teacher. However, with her superior strength, Kodo grunted before tearing the wire apart. She then quickly reacted to my attack by reaching her hand outwards and grabbing my wrist, locking me in position. I quickly attacked and swung my right leg upwards towards her chin, to which she opted to try to grab with her other hand. At this moment, I focused on the restriction seal and released part of the restrictions on my movements, and my kick suddenly accelerated, catching her off guard. She was able to tilt her head to the side fast enough for my kick to miss, but not enough for a graze to appear on her cheek. I took the moment when she was touching her barely noticeable injury to slip out of her grip and backflip away. Ping! Ping! Congratulations! Perfect movement has leveled up by 1. Congratulations! Hand-to-hand combat has leveled up by 1. Perfect movement LVL 25, 4.20%. Perfect movement is a skill given to those who have mastery of their own bodies, granting the user amazing agility and accuracy. This skill allows the user to decrease the amount of wasted movement they make as the skill level increases. 50% increase to movement speed. 25% increase to attack speed. 25% increase to evasion. 25% decrease in wasted movement. Hand-to-hand combat mastery LVL 15, 1.40%. Hand-to-hand combat encompasses all forms of such combat. Increased mastery of any type of hand-to-hand combat will increase the level of this skill and the effectiveness of your hand-to-hand fighting techniques. 15% increase to physical damage. 15% increase to attack speed. 15% increase in reaction time. You suddenly got faster. She stated while feeling the scratch on her cheek. You released your restrictions to catch me off guard with a sudden burst of speed. Not bad, Yoru, but don't try something like that out in the field. She placed her hands to her sides before continuing. In the field, you will never have the chance to hold back, which means that you won't have restrictions to suddenly remove to get the drop on your enemy. Always go for the kill on an assignment unless stated otherwise in the mission parameters. The only reason we are using restrictions to fight is so that we can get you stronger. Understood? I nodded at her statement. I had no plans of being stupid enough to hold back during a mission, but that also meant I wouldn't be able to surprise my enemies with a sudden increase in strength and speed. Too bad my life came first over anything, and if I died because I held back, well, my regrets would go with me to the grave. Seeing me understand her lesson, she placed a hand on my shoulder. Then we will call it a day. Daily quest complete. Training Arc 2. Objective 1 Reward, 500 EXP, plus 1 stat point. Objective 2 Reward, failed. With that, we left in a body flicker. It was still day 90 of my tort training, and we had finished taking a shower together. Afterwards, I was all dried up and clothed, but it was pretty late at night. I sat on the dining room table wondering what Kodo was going to cook up for tonight. Apparently, she had liked my omelet that day even though I hadn't done anything particularly special when making it. As a result, however, we alternated the days we cooked for each other, which was fine by me since it helped me level my cooking skill. I was broken out of my musings when I noticed Kodo come out of our room dressed quite nicely. It looked like she was going out someplace. "You look good. Who's the lucky guy?" I was promptly flicked in the head. Hard. "Ow," I said, rubbing my forehead. She retracted her finger, then grabbed my wrist while stating with a slight smile, "Part of being a ninja is knowing how to blend in with your surroundings, especially in a foreign environment. I've never bothered to get you civilian clothing, but I think it is time for a change of pace." Without waiting for my reply, she used Shunshin and appeared in front of a clothing store. I was pretty used to the gut-wrenching sensation of being carried by that technique by now, so I was impassive if anything. I don't think shinobi use Shunshin when they are trying to blend in. For that, I got another flick to my head. Not with that attitude, they don't. "Now come on, let's get you something to wear." No, I'm pretty sure attitude has nothing to do with it. But I wisely decided to keep myself quiet. Afterward, we looked around the store and decided that I would look good in a simple red t-shirt and some black sweatpants to contrast my white hair. At least the shirt was my favorite color. To be honest, I knew about as much about fashion as the unfortunate size of my 4-year-old mini-me. I.e. very little. That being said, Kodo seemed to know what she was doing, so I let her play dress up with me all the while I was thinking about what we were going to eat. You know, now that I think about it, I'm not actually hung. "Maybe we should get your ears pierced," she said while rubbing her chin in thought. I raised a brow at the woman who said that to me and replied emotionlessly, "No." She shrugged, "All right then. But you look good in these clothes. I'll pick out a few more of these, and then we'll go out to eat." I nodded at her and allowed her to do her things. I wonder what place she had in mind. With those kinds of thoughts running through my head, Kodo came back with a bag in her hand and in a puff it disappeared. I looked at the paper tag in her hand and noticed that it had a seal on it. "A storage seal, huh?" She nodded while putting the seal in her cleavage. "It's very convenient for shinobi to have, and it is one of the most important equipment a shinobi should acquire. It makes equipment storage for long missions a lot more bearable." I nodded at her words, then asked, "So where are we going for food?" The woman lightly smiled. "I hear that there was a new ramen store opening up today." I wanted to try something new. I was curious, so I nodded. Kodo decided to walk me there instead of using Shunshin, and so I enjoyed the Konoha night scenery while walking by. I could really appreciate the beauty of this place at a time like this, when I wasn't training, eating, or sleeping. Unfortunately, all good things come to an end, and we eventually came upon a small shop that read Ramen Ichirako. I was able to hide the surprise on my face as I was dragged in by my glorified babysitter, MMM. "It has that new shop smell." "Is that even a T-dash? Minato. Look, it's the new ramen store. We have to try it." Yes, Kushina, but is there a need to yell I'm right dash? Ha! Are you telling me not to get excited about ramen? Sai, let's just go inside. My eyes widened in surprise at the sounds and names the voices spoke, and I watched as the flap to the store was lifted up and 2 people came into view. One of them was a familiar face of 3 months ago with the same spiky blonde hair and blue eyes. The other individual was a woman who had a slender, but feminine build, fair skin, violet eyes, and red hair. It reached her ankles with shoulder-length strands that framed both sides of her face, and a black clip that parted her hair to the left. I noted that my teacher had frozen up for a moment as if she had felt something dangerous while looking at the red-haired woman. I looked at her in concern before I remembered. This red-haired woman not only had monstrous chakra from her bloodline, but she carried something which made her even more monstrous. To someone like my teacher who was an adept sensor, it must have been like a shock. Kushina, I thought. Well, what were the odds? I tugged at my teacher's sleeve to bring her out of her temporary daze. However true to her skills as a ninja, she had already composed herself. She looked at me with a small smile dotting her lips. I'm all right, Yoru, thanks for worrying. I looked at her for a second longer, making sure she was really okay before nodding. Well, at least it is EMP. The blonde-haired man stopped speaking as he noticed the two other occupants in the room, me and Kodo. He looked at me with squinted eyes as if trying to remember something, before his eyes widened. Ah. It's you. He looked me up and down then before smiling, and you look to be in good health as well. Not bad, kid. Thank you for your praise, Lord Namikaze, I said with a bow. Something about etiquette that Kodo told me was necessary. The man in question suddenly looked sheepish. Haha, no need to call me that, especially in this setting. He looked at me and smiled. Mr. Namikaze, or just Minato is fine. Alright, Mr. Namikaze. Hey Minato, who's the Kakashi ripoff? The red-headed woman suddenly asked, most likely annoyed about how she was being ignored. Minato, understanding that, held her hand reassuringly and stated, he's someone I met a few months back at the place where I was going to test my genin team. He's a very talented individual, so I took note of him. The blue-eyed man then looked to Kodo, who lightly smiled in kind, and I wasn't the only one to do so either. Kodo nodded her head before she replied, Lord Danzo was impressed with his maturity, and Yoru has only grown a lot more since then. His rate of improvement is astonishing, and in a few years he may surpass me. She said that last part while patting my head, which I gladly accepted because it felt pretty good. I noticed that Kushina was looking just slightly annoyed, either about the fact that she was ignored again or the fact that she hasn't had ramen yet. It was hard to tell with her, but seeing that, I decided to intervene. Mr. Namikaze, would I be correct in assuming that the woman with the beautiful red hair beside you is your wife? I had to make sure to compliment the red hair. Not only because I knew Kushina would like it, but because red was my favorite color. I saw her eyes suddenly widen before she disappeared. My danger sense kicked into overdrive, and I moved to dodge. But it was too late. Erg. I found myself in a crushing embrace with my face in between two soft mounds, but I could hear Kushina squeal happily, Hey Minato. She started, crushing me deeper into her bosom. You know, now that my mind had somewhat calmed down, I realized that I wasn't actually Suffo I want one. I could feel the pin-drop silence at the utterance of that statement, and my brain lost track of its ability to think as it processed those words. It took me a moment to realize what she had meant, and it seemed like I wasn't the only one. I could hear Kodo laugh with a puff and Minato cough awkwardly with what I imagined were his cheeks furiously red. I wouldn't know because I was being crushed. We can work on that, dear, all I wanted was to have some dinner. He muttered that last statement, but everyone pretended not to hear it. The red-haired woman smiled, then looked at me with a warm gaze. Thank you, Yoru, and you're right, that man over there is my husband, someone I cherish. I noticed Minato flush happily at the statement while Kodo looked on with a slight smile. I nodded at her words, then he is lucky to have you. Throughout all this, however, I felt like we had forgotten something. Kushina smiled at my statement. Yes, he is, after all. The red-haired woman looked at Minato in irritation. If it wasn't for me, he would still be stuck in that cave he calls his workshop. She shook her head in exasperation. Honestly, sometimes I regret teaching you seals. It's like you love them more than me. The man in question hastily shook his hands in denial, and no, Kushina, it's not like that. I'm just getting really good at seals, and I've been having some breakthrough. There you go again. Can't you go a day without talking about them? But if I can figure out how to reverse engineer the second Hokage's technique dash. Goodness, you should just marry those things already. Kushina. All the while Kodo and I were watching impassively. Is this what a married couple is like? I asked. The woman in question nodded. Pretty much. Why? Having second thoughts about finding someone to protect? She asked with a smirk. I might be reconsidering. You excuse me? For pairs of eyes stared at the new voice, to which the owner flinched for a moment before coughing and recomposing himself. He was a man who looked to be in his late 20s with lightly tanned skin and light brown hair. Since you all are here, would you like to order something? Ah, now I remember what I had forgotten. We were in a restaurant. Minato looked on apologetically while Kushina had stars in her eyes. Kodo and I looked at each other, shrugged, then sat down. Ah. I'll have 5 bowls of miso ramen please. Kushina said while plopping down next to me. Minato sighed and sat down next to his wife. 1 bowl for me. I'll get a pork ramen please. Kodo asked. Likewise. Was my reply. The man nodded after writing our orders, happy that he had gotten some business, before going to the back of the kitchen to prepare our meals. After a little bit, the man came out with our food and placed the bowls in front of us. Enjoy your meals, he stated with a smile before walking back into his work area. Kushina dug in as soon as the food was placed down while Minato sighed and started eating much more liberally than his wife. Ah. Ramen never fails to satisfy me. The Uzumaki started after somehow finishing her first bowl. I looked down at my 3/4 filled bowl and looked at her empty one. I touched my chin in thought at the mystery. So Yoru. Kushina started, swallowing strands of ramen from her second bowl. Minato says you're pretty talented, like another Kakashi. She smirked as she continued, you've even got the whole face masked down. Is that a thing that geniuses use nowadays? I idly twirled the noodles in my soup as I replied, I think I wear the mask better than him though. It was barely a whisper, but I was sure they heard it. I don't consider myself a genius, so to speak. I like to think that while I might have an advantage over others, I still work as arduously as possible in order to improve. I prefer the term diligent if anything. Well, as diligent as one needed to be when they had an entire otherworldly system at their disposal. So, you prefer to work hard, huh? She asked, slurping up more noodles. Then what do you do when you aren't training? I ate some ramen from my bowl, idly noting that I still had 1/2 left while Kushina was almost done with her second bowl. Eat. I noticed that Kushina was looking at me intently and study. Her eyes narrowed and my bowl suddenly looked interesting. I wondered if it was made of clay. Sleep. And Kushina didn't look too pleased with my reply, and I wondered if the table I was on was made of clay as well. What if I was made of clay? Wait, didn't the Titan Prometheus make the first human from clay? I wondered if we were all part clay. A shinobi should be able to easily interact with other individuals, whether it be for infiltration purposes, talking to clients, or leading a team. Kushina moved her gaze towards Kodo. I'm surprised you haven't moved to Yam this skill. The hazel eyes woman lightly smiled. Actually, this night was the start of that training for him. She patted my head and continued, I wanted him to get out and watch me interact with others, and hopefully he would pick up on something. I always thought her sudden decision to bring me out for dinner was fishy. Kushina looked thoughtful at that. That's not a bad idea, especially for a visual learner, but I believe interacting with people his age would help him build up his skills more. She rubbed her chin in thought before seemingly thinking of something. Oh, I know. The woman looked at me with a smile. Why don't you come over my place whenever you aren't too busy training? Kodo and I looked at each other before the former spoke. I suppose I would work something out with his schedule, but how would this help him? I could tell Minato was confused as well until he suddenly smiled in realization. The Uzumaki smirked. Minato usually brings his kids over after training. Yoro can be around and talk with them when they're there. I know that he and Kakashi are close to the same age, and I feel like they would be good friends. Kodo thought for a moment, then nodded with a smile while looking at Minato. If we can get a schedule on when you train your team, I could find a way to work around it, if you don't mind. The future fourth Hokage grinned and nodded. I don't mind at all. I think it would be a great experience. Especially for my youngest team member. With that, the mood in the dining table significantly improved, and the adults talked about a bunch of things while I just sat there enjoying my noodles. Were they made out of clay too? Food for thought. Day 180. Ever since that day 3 months ago, my teacher had changed up my training schedule slightly. It was enough for me to go visit Minato and Kushina's place for about a couple hours, and hang out with Minato's Genin team. Needless to say, the expression on Obito's face was priceless, though I think Rin was fine having me around and Kakashi didn't seem to care either way. My training was more or less still the same, with exercise and body conditioning in the morning than combat training. The quest to hit my teacher had been changed to a new one after she had decided to work on my stealth and infiltration skills. Basically, we played hide and seek. With a twist, of course. We usually played in a more forested training ground in which there were 2 parts to our game. The first part was the basic hide and seek, where I had to hide and my teacher had to find me. She usually did. The second part was where I had to steal something from under her nose while in the woods. This was significantly harder, and more often than not she caught me, which would mean I had to cook for the evening. I fear that my increasing cooking skill was the cause of that punishment, but I didn't complain. Now, however, I had managed to avoid my teacher's detection long enough for it to be counted my win, and I had somehow managed to steal the metal token from under her nose. Afterwards, I made it back to my base, thereby completing the mission. Daily quest complete. Training Arc 3. Objective 1 reward, 250 EXP. Objective 2 reward, 500 EXP. Ping. Stealth has leveled up by 1. Stealth, active, on, LVL 55, 2.45%. Stealth is the fundamental skill that all ninjas learn to become, well, better ninjas. Having good enough stealth allows you to more easily infiltrate enemy lines, assassinate priority targets, and spy. This skill is subconsciously activated when you need to go into stealth mode. It grants you increased stealth where your every movement is subconsciously inconspicuous, making it more difficult to notice your presence and find you. Stealth infiltration, avoidance, and concealment ability are at 55%. For stronger opponents, -2% for each level they surpass you by. With a sigh of relief, I sat down on the ground, and no sooner did I see my teacher walking out of the foliage with a smile on her face. You did good, Yoru. You managed to hide from me even after I had discovered you. You then steadily made your way back here. She then sighed. As per rules, I'll make dinner, but your cooking will always be the best. She finished with a grin. I smiled despite myself. You know that too much of a good thing isn't good, right? To which Kodo shrugged, then smirked before transferring us back home with a shunshin. Day 364. I can't believe it's almost been a year. I thought while walking my way out of the forest grounds. My training had been more or less progressing at the same schedule, with me occasionally going over to the Namikaze Uzumaki compound. Had I ever mentioned how beautiful that place? Nevertheless, somewhere along the line, my teacher had decided that it would be a great idea for me to have some survival training. Needless to say, I was not expecting what she had planned. For starters, every other week she would drop me off in the middle of Training Ground 44, aka, the Forest of Death. I was expected to stay there for at least 3 days, during which I would be surviving off the land and aiming to collect pelts from certain creatures that inhabited that place. She was apparently of the idea that I had been progressing so quickly that I was seemingly ready for this kind of training. She was right, mostly. I had little problem keeping myself alive in the face of the ferocious beasts that dwelled in that place, but it was mainly the intricacies of survival that I had issues with. Kodo didn't allow me any equipment because there will be times when you are alone in a foreign environment with nothing more than your 2 legs and feet to keep you company. You have to learn to survive without having a lot of materials. The only saving grace of this whole thing was that she allowed me to have some water, and that I got repeat quests for surviving in this place. That, however, didn't change the fact that I had to learn how to hunt for my food, find clean sources of water, and learn which plants were poisonous or not. That last one, especially, was a painfully learned lesson, as I managed to increase my poison resistance quite a bit. At least they now had less effect on me. I made sure the storage seals where I kept the pelts were all safe before I made my way out of the gates to the forest. Daily quest complete. Training Arc 4. Objective 1. Survive for 3 or more days in the Forest of Death while completing your teacher's objectives. Objective 1 Reward, 1000 EXP, plus 1 stat points. I breathed out a sigh of exhaustion before I noticed that a colorful-looking scroll on the ground in front of me. It was hard to miss, but the most notable thing was that T had my name. A message from Kodo. I thought before I moved towards it. I suddenly stopped when I thought of something. With narrowed eyes, I jumped backward while throwing a handful of kunai near the scroll. Instantly, the place around where I had been was barraged with throwing needles, and out of nowhere a net trap appeared from the ground and snapped up the empty area that I had been in. My eye twitched before I looked around some more and decided it was safe. I picked up the scroll and quickly read through its contents. Hey Yoru, if you have managed to get to this scroll without falling into the traps, then I'm happy to say that my training paid off. Anyway, I kinda knew when you were coming out, so if you are reading this then make sure to shower up and meet me at the Namikaze Uzumaki house. I wondered if it was one of those days where I could hang out there. But I wasn't surprised that she had been watching over me during my training in this place. Regardless, I shrugged and made my way back home. With a quick shower and a fresh pair of clothes, I made my way to Minato and Kushina's place. I knocked on the door a couple times and scratched my chin in thought when I got no answer. Well, if they are expecting me. I placed my right palm on a seal tag that was on the door and flared my chakra. The seal glowed for a second, then the door opened for me. If I hadn't been expected, then the seal would simply not function, and if I tried to force my way in. Well, it's a good thing I never did. I walked into the house and noticed that it was pretty dark inside, and it had me wondering if they had really been expecting me. I switched on the light switch right next to me and covered my eyes for a moment as I adjusted to the brightness. Happy birthday! My eyes widened as I gazed upon the forms of Team Minato, the Namikaze himself, Kushina, and my own teacher Kodo. Everyone was smiling save for Kakashi, who really never smiled. You guys, I said softly. My teacher grinned then dragged me to the cake that was prepared. It had 5 thin candles on top that burned with a small flame. I know that you usually didn't celebrate your birthday, but I thought it would be a good change of pace if we were to celebrate it today. She paused as she put her hands on my shoulders and made me face the cake. Now then, birthday boy makes a wish. I looked at the smiling faces of the people that were here before me, then at the burning candles on the cake as an unknown feeling welled up inside me. I couldn't quite comprehend why I felt this way, and I didn't know what to do. Yoru, are you okay? I heard Kushina ask as she looked at me worriedly. I didn't know why she was worried, and I could see my caretaker looking at me with a slight frown before she smiled warmly. It's all right, Yoru. I got your back, she stated before she wiped something from beneath my eyes, and it was then that I noticed. My eyes were wet. Something got into them. I muttered, though, from everyone's smiling faces, I got the impression they didn't believe me. Of course, it did, Yoru. Kodo said with a knowing smirk, now blow out the candles and make your wish already, we need to move on to the presents. I nodded and closed my eyes for a moment before opening them and blowing out the candles. Kodo cut up the cake and distributed it to the people around. I had the pleasure of seeing Kakashi eat the cake without removing his mask. I wondered how he did that. "Alright, time for the main event," Kodo stated, snapping me out of my thoughts. She turned towards me with a couple scrolls in her possession before she handed them to me. "Happy birthday, Yoro." I took the scrolls in her hands and my eyes widened. "These are. Would you like to learn the skill water style, water bullet jutsu? Yes/no. Would you like to learn the skill lightning style, lightning strike jutsu? Yes/no. I dismissed the prompts while watching my mentor. "I have had you build on your foundations for about a year now, so I think you are ready." She paused as she pointed at the scrolls. "I believe it is best for you to focus on these two for now since these elements are the ones I'm most proficient in. I wouldn't want you to focus on too much for now." I nodded as I understood the subtle meaning of her words. Even though I had affinities for all 5 chakra natures, it would be time-consuming for me to become proficient in the techniques of all 5 nature types while simultaneously focusing on my normal training routine. Seeing me understand, she smiled, then looked towards Minato and Kushina. "Well, go on, I'm not the only one who got you something, you know." I tried not to act surprised as I walked up to the couple. I noticed the lightly smiling faces of Minato and Kushina, and it was the former who spoke. "Yoro, it's been great having you around. Kushina and I really didn't know what to get you for today, but then we remembered." He took out a scroll and a bunch of paint brushes and presented them to me alongside a Fuinjutsu seal tag. "We remembered that you showed interest in Fuinjutsu, but I couldn't really give you instructions since I had my own team to work on dash. And I hadn't known you well enough at the time to allow you to learn my clan's secrets." Kushina finished, but she continued with a smile. "But I believe in your character, and I won't mind giving you some tips and advice on them." She then handed me a book and pointed to it, and the scrolls in my hand. "We decided it would be fine for you to have some tools to practice with, so the scroll and brushes are to help you practice your calligraphy, while this book is some basic information on Fuinjutsu such as the basic storage tags and exploding tags." She picked up seal tag that Minato gave me alongside the scroll and brushes before pressing her finger in the center of the seal on the tag. I raised my brow when her finger was painted black and she looked at me with a smile. "This is a specially made storage seal that has a lot of ink. All you have to do is press your brush in the center of the seal, and it will give you some ink to work with. This should last you a few months." Before even giving me a moment to be surprised, Kushina took the scroll Minato gave me, opened it, and drew a line through the white paper with her inked finger. She explained to me, "This scroll is also specially made so that you can erase all the ink marks you made on it while practicing your calligraphy. It will save you the trouble of having to buy new pieces of blank paper to practice with." She rolled up the scroll and pointed to a seal on the back of a channel. "Chakra through here, and it will erase the marks you made on the scroll." I took the scroll and did just that. The seal lines lit up with a dull light before I opened the scroll and noticed that the streak Kushina had made was gone. "Happy birthday, Yoro," they stated with a smile. I gripped the scroll tightly, placed my hands to my sides, and bowed deeply. "Thank you so much for your gift. I promise you that I will never betray the trust and expectations you have for me. If there is any way that I can ever repay you, stop being so uptight and just accept it." I heard Obito say as he came up to me, a displeased expression on his face. "We didn't come here because of some expectations or whatever. We came here to celebrate the day you were born, eat some cake, and have some fun." I could tell everyone agreed from their smiling faces and the slightly less impassive expression on Kakashi's face, though I couldn't really tell with that mask on. "Thank you, everyone," I said softly. "All right, enough of this." Obito grabbed my wrist while I looked on impassively, though the grin on his face was mildly unsettling. "Let's play." Day 710. Days turned to weeks and weeks turned to months as almost 2 years had passed since I had regained consciousness in this world, so to speak, or whatever had happened to me. Ever since my birthday almost a year ago, my visits to the Namikaze Uzumaki compound had been slightly more frequent, but my training schedule hadn't changed too much. My teacher had added some ninjutsu training after that day, mainly focusing on the scrolls that she gave me, and the basics of ninjutsu that all ninja were supposed to learn. Kawarimi, active, LVL 35, 23.65%. Kawarimi is a technique that allows the user to replace their own body with some other object, generally with a block of wood or a log, the moment an attack lands. With an increase in level, the distance that you can replace your body with objects increases. Current range, 350 meters. Costs, 50 CP. Henge, active, LVL 65. The henge technique is typically used to change into people other than oneself, but one also has the ability to change into animals, plants, and even inanimate objects like weapons. This gives the technique a wide range of versatility. There is a caveat, however, as a transformation performed by an inexperienced person will have obvious discrepancies, and it will be impossible to deceive anyone with it. Leveling up this skill will allow the realism of your transformation to increase, and at a certain level, your transformations become more than mere illusions and actually become true transformations that will be nearly impossible to tell apart from the real thing. 65% henge realism. Costs, 50 CP. Shunshin, active, LVL 90, 23.42%. The Shunshin, also known as the body flicker technique, is a skill that ninja can use to move long distances at an almost untraceable speed. To an observer, it appears as if the user has teleported. It is accomplished by using chakra to temporarily vitalize the body and move at extreme speeds. Current range, 900 meters. Costs, 100 CP. Water style, water bullet jutsu, active, LVL 45, 12.34%. Water bullet jutsu allows the user to shoot compressed balls of water from their mouth. The technique's range, the number of bullets and power increases proportionally to its level. Current range, 45 meters. Damage, 450% ENGY. Current number of bullets, 4. Cost, 350 CP. Lightning style, lightning strike jutsu, active, LVL 48. 43.23%. The lightning strike jutsu allows the user to create an electric current that can hit multiple individuals at the same time. Furthermore, it can extend incredible distances and can avoid obstacles. Current range, 96 meters. Damage, 528% ENGY. Cost, 500 CP. I smiled as I looked at the increase in my skill set and levels. There was honestly a lot of skills that I had improved upon, and a few more I had gained along the way, such as basic calligraphy, passive, LVL 20, 34.58%. A basic and non-combative technique that improves one's penmanship and their artistic side. Allows for better drawn pictures, written kanji, and designs. Penmanship improved by 20%. Writing speed increased by 20%. 20% chance of having no faults in characters drawn. More importantly, I had gained a few skills after my base stats had reached 50. The bonuses I got from my skills did not count towards receiving perk skills for my stats, but in the end, I couldn't complain, especially since they were pretty useful. Energy conductor, passive, LVL, max. Energy conductor is the ability is given to those with high amounts of any form of energy. The user becomes more in tune with their own energy's nature, allowing them greater energy control. 20% increase to your energy regeneration. 20% increase to your energy capacity. 10% damage increase to energy-based attacks. High energy capacity, passive, LVL max. High energy capacity is an elite ability given to the few users that are born with a very exceptional ability to handle any form of energy. 30% damage increase to energy-based attacks. 20% less energy usage for all abilities. Eidetic Memory, passive, LVL max. Eidetic memory is an ability given to extremely intelligent individuals. This allows for the one given the ability to recall everything they perceive with an accuracy of 100%. Perception, passive, LVL max. Perception is a skill granted to those with great wisdom. With great brain capability comes the increase in efficiency of all human senses. Sight, hearing, taste, touch and smell increase by your percentage WIS value. If you have 200 WIS, then your senses will increase by 200%. Iron body, passive, LVL max. Iron body is an ability given to those rare few born with surpassing vitality. The user possesses a body with great resistance to harm and unending strength to endure. 50% increase to chakra recovery rate. 25% increase to durability. 10% increase to total HP amount. 10% increase to total chakra amount. Dense muscle, passive, LVL max. Dense muscle is a skill given to those with overwhelming strength. The denseness of your muscle increases greatly, allowing you to suffer less damage from physical attacks. Your STR value counts as damage reduction to physical attacks. Cat's Grace, passive, LVL max. Cat's Grace is a skill given to those with a high level of dexterity, and allows you to have the elegance of movement as a feline. You acquire cat-like reflexes, and you take less damage from falling from extraordinary heights that would usually damage you. 50% increase to reflexes and movement speed. Decrease fall damage by 50%. My base ENGY stat had already reached 100, and so I had gained another passive perk for it. I had almost broken my impassive facade at the face my teacher made when she had checked my chakra some time back. Apparently, I had as much chakra as a Jonin-level shinobi with even more control than the average ninja. I got the feeling that she was a tad envious at me from how she trained me afterward. There were a lot of other skills that I had improved upon, such as my chakra sonar, and a variety of others, but I stopped myself from checking them as I saw my destination. It was the mouth of a dark cave where Komodo stated she had kept my graduation gift. I gripped my fists as I thought about how Michigan I knew I would miss being with her. The thought that I would eventually join the ranks of Root and go off on my own had barely registered to me in the close to 2 years I spent with my teacher. It wasn't until she had told me that my training with her would be over soon, did I realize how much I cared for that woman. She was the closest thing to a mother I had, but she was also my teacher and friend. I shook my head from those thoughts as the mouth of the cave stared me back. Even though I would go my own way, that didn't mean that I would not see Komodo, or that she wouldn't be my teacher anymore. It was just that I would be unable to see her as often. I imagined that I would be in a lot of missions, especially due to the currently escalating tensions between the villages. War was annoying. Regardless of my feelings, I needed to pass her test and get that gift. I looked at my stats and prepared for the challenge ahead. Name, Jordan. Race, human. Level, LVL 40 next level, 1, 250/82, 100. HP, 12922/12922 Regan, 226.15 per min. CP, 32857/32857 Regan, 640.72 per min. CC, 95%. STR, 129.2. VIT, 138.7. Dex, 136.8. Int, 200.1. WIS, 190.9. NG, 336. Points, 287. Rio, 1000. My observe has risen to such a level that I was able to see my teacher's complete stats. I wasn't surprised when I noticed that she still outclassed me in most of my stats, but it made me realize that I still had a long way to go. My teacher had told me that simply judging from my physical prowess, I would be classified as a mid-Chunin level shinobi. In conjunction with the fact that my training had become more diversified over time, my physical training had been giving me stat points at a slower rate, thereby limiting the number of times I could grow stronger. Regardless, I was confident enough that I would be fine for this test. With that, I used my chakra sonar skill in order to detect any chakra signatures that may have been hidden. Chakra sonar, passive/active, LV65, 5.45%. Default setting, 1 pulse every 5 seconds. Maximum range, 650 meters. Cost, 5 CP per pulse. I got some feedback soon after, and my brows furrowed as I felt a large life signature in the cave. I knew she would not have made this easy, but a boy could still dream. With caution in my steps, I made my way into the cave, my sonar skill set on autopilot effectively making me a sensor. I paid attention as the life signature I had locked onto moved and tightly gripped my kunai as it headed towards me. I wish I could have just snuck in and taken the item, but of course, my sensei wanted proof of my victory over the guardian of this cavern, so sneaking wasn't an option. My eyes narrowed as the beast was suddenly 400 meters away, and seemed to be charging straight at me. In less than a second, it was suddenly 250 meters away, but I gripped my weapon and waited for it to arrive. The ground around me seemed to quake as a gargantuan 5 meters tall figure appeared in front of me. It had armored scales creating a rugged hide, slitted eyes, and a forked tongue. Through its gaping maw, I noticed its saliva dripping with tinges of blood. A gigantic Komodo dragon, I thought. Neat. Ping. Daily quest alert. Training arc finale. Your beautiful but sadistic teacher has trained you in the skills expected of a shinobi, but now it is time for you to graduate. Of course, considering what type of individual she is, your teacher is not going to make this easy. Show her how much you have grown. Objective 1. Defeat the gigantic Komodo dragon and take proof of your kill. Objective 2. Secure your graduation present. Objective 1 reward, plus 5 stat points. Objective 2 reward, a cool graduation present. Failure, Kodo will be disappointed in you. You don't want that. Do you accept? Y/N. I selected Y just in time to hear the beast release a deafening roar. I had to close my eyes at the wind generated from the giant lizard, and my nose wrinkled in disgust at the thing's rancid breath. Observe. Giant Komodo Dragon LVL 38. HP 50,000. CP 20,000. STR 230. VIT 300. Dex 100. Int 50. Wis 30. NG 150. Luck 5. Perks. Dense scales, reduces physical damage by 30%. Description. A giant beast that dwells inside a cave located in the depths of the Forest of Death. This beast is very territorial, and will attack anyone who trespasses in its domain, granted that it realizes that they have trespassed. Its tough scales create a natural defense that reduces the effectiveness of attacks, and its venom is as deadly as its size. Tread carefully. EXP gain, 25,000. Drops? She never fails to make things interesting. With that, I jumped backward as the claw of the monster smashed the ground where I once stood. My hands blurred as I flipped through hand seals, causing my cheeks to swell with fluid and 4 bullets of highly pressurized water to spew from my mouth. In an amazing show of dexterity for its size, the giant lizard managed to dodge 2 of the 4 speeding water bullets with a quick tilt as its head. The impact of the 2 bullets that hit it, however, caused the beast to step back a step, though other than that it looked more enraged than hurt. 450% NG equals 1,512. 1512 plus damage bonuses equals 2,495. 450% NG equals 1,512. 1512 plus damage bonuses equals 2,495. HP 45, 010/50, 000. With a roar of fury and a show of amazing speed, the beast turned its body and swung its tail towards me at incredibly high speeds. Right before the attack made contact, I ducked and went through a few hand signs, but I was forced to jump out of the way as stones flew towards me. The lizard may have missed its mark, but it used its tail's momentum to impact the expansive cave's wall and send large shards of rock my way. With my vision obstructed, my danger sense suddenly screamed at me to move, to which I quickly responded by jumping up in the air, just in time for a gaping jaw to snap at the area I had just been standing. Now airborne, I had little ability to dodge and could only watch forebodingly as glowing red lines appeared on the Komodo dragon's neck. With a roar of exertion, the immense lizard shot an intense beam of red flames that shot towards me at near sonic speeds. A fire-breathing Komodo dragon, neat. I remained calm as the chakra that I had channeled through my earlier hand seals flowed through me and vibrates at an intense frequency. The whole process occurred almost instantaneously, and with a silent shout, I launched a powerful electric current from my hands which impacted the beam of fire that had been thrown my way. The force of my attack was enough to rebuff me to the cave ceiling, after which I stopped my attack and went through some hand seals just before the lizard's attack impacted me. All it saw were the ashy remains of a log from my substitution, but I didn't allow it any time to regain its bearings. I appeared right next to its large open eye, and I could notice the dilation of the dragon's slitted pupils as it caught sight of me beside it. The lizard was too slow to react to the intense current of light that shot out from my outstretched arm. Lightning style, Reijiki, lightning strike. Critical. 528% NG equals 1774. 1774 plus damage bonuses equals 2930. 2930 times 2 is equal to 5860. HP 39, 150/50, 000. The enormous reptile roared in pain at the damage my attack had done to it. It closed its now mostly destroyed eye and tried to turn its head to glare at me. But I was no longer there. As soon as my attack connected, I snuck into the underbelly of the beast where there were no scales to protect itself. I reinforced my body with chakra, increasing my body's attack, speed, and defensive capabilities. With a leap, I cocked my fist back and impacted the exposed belly of the reptile. STR plus VIT plus DEX, X3 is equal to 1214. 1214 plus added bonuses equals 2915. HP 36, 235/50, 000. The strength of my impact lifted it off the ground, and I heard its roar of fury as pain no doubt spread through its body, but I furrowed my brows. This thing had an immense level of vitality, and it would take me more than a few hits to finally kill it. I broke myself out of my thoughts and leaped away from the now rampaging beast. Its throes of anger was causing it to thrash about and indiscriminately target anything in its immediate surroundings. I could work with that. It was distracted and angry, giving me enough time to do something I had practiced before. I flipped through the hand seals for my water gun technique, filling up my mouth with fluid in the process. With that set, I flipped through the hand signs for my lightning strike. My lungs filled with air and my mouth with water, I released 4 bullets of pressurized water at the rampaging beast. Before the bullets had even traveled a foot away from me, I channeled the lightning from my Reijiki into the bullets, thereby drastically increasing their destructive and penetrative power. 528% plus 450% NG equals 3286. 3286 plus damage bonuses equals 6245. 528% plus 450% NG equals 3286. 3286 plus damage bonuses equals 6245. 528% plus 450% NG equals 3286. 3286 plus damage bonuses equals 6245. 528% plus 450% ng equals 3286. 3286 plus damage bonuses equals 6245. HP 11, 255/50, 000. My highly pressurized electric water attacks had pierced through the lizard's hide and shocked it from within. The compounded damage caused the monster to howl in agony, though it was still alive. One of the reasons my teacher had given me a lightning and water technique to work with was because they complemented each other. Since water could conduct lightning, a lightning release technique could be used to increase the damage of a water release technique. The best part was that the combination attack also included both my natural lightning affinity bonuses and my natural water affinity bonuses into the damage calculation. This meant currently when I used the attack, I would get a 50% bonus to my jutsu effect instead of the individual 25% bonus when I used just a single element. My combination attack, however, took a long enough time to prepare that it was not suitable to use in the midst of a battle unless the enemy was severely distracted. Shinobi battled at high speeds and battles between two enemies could last less than 15 seconds, during which hundreds of moves could have been exchanged. Fortunately, I was facing a beast who wasn't quite as intelligent nor nearly as fast as a skilled shinobi. I noticed smoke coming out of the rather large bullet holes from my attack, and I capitalized on this opportunity. Tiger Snake Dog. I rushed up to the rampaging beast, ducked a rage-induced tail swipe to my head, and jumped up to the bloody hole on the beast's side. My hand charged with lightning, I stuck it inside the reptile's gaping wound. Lightning style, Reijiki. Fatal. 528% ng equals 1774. 1774 plus damage bonuses equals 2930. 2930 times 5 is equal to 14,650. HP 0/50, 000. The beast gave one last deafening cry of anguish before it slumped to the ground dead. I breathed out a sigh of exhaustion and sat down next to the downed lizard, idly using my chakra sonar skill to make sure that there weren't any more enemies near me. My last attack, based on the physiology of most quadruped reptiles, had most likely pierced its heart. The wounds left by my lightning/water combination attack had been very deep, allowing me access to the exposed inner flesh of the Komodo dragon. I had aimed my combination attack near the heart of the beast, giving me easier access to it after the lightning water bullets had pierced its hide. With that, my lightning strike was easily able to reach its heart through its soft flesh, allowing for a much faster kill. I rotated my arms around to get rid of the invisible stiffness and tilted my neck enough to hear a small crack. With that, I turned to face the beast and raised my brow in surprise at a message I had received. Would you like to loot the enemy and allow only the necessary drops to remain? Y/N. This is making it more like a game. I thought as I shrugged and clicked Y. The monster suddenly turned into motes of light that sunk into the cavern floor, before a few items dropped to the ground, some large fangs, the monster's hide, and a glowing red orb that seemed to pulse with energy. I picked them up and read through their descriptions. Komodo dragon fawn, 20. A large fang from the mouth of a large Komodo dragon. It has venomous properties from the beast it was once a part of that can be extracted and used for a variety of things, from making antidotes. Komodo dragon scales. The scales of giant Komodo dragons boast superb defensive abilities and are furthermore conductive to chakra. They can be sewn into a material to promote their defensive capabilities and longevity. Chakra beast core, Komodo dragon. Powerful chakra beasts sometimes generate a core, made up of crystallized chakra, that is based on one of their attributes. These cores can be absorbed by humans with chakra or other chakra beasts to improve their physical capabilities, and, based on the attribute of the chakra beast the core came from, they can also be used to improve one's chakra affinity. Gain 10% of the Komodo dragon's STR, VIT, and ENGY stat. Greatly increase your natural fire affinity. I raised my brow while looking at the description of the last one. Well, that's new. Chapter 5. I tossed the orb up and down while humming in thought. My vague memories of this world didn't have any information on something like this, so they were pretty useless. Regardless, I could always just ask my teacher about this thing. After all, she was a pretty knowledgeable person. With that done, I went in deeper into the cave to look for my present. I moved forward carefully and constantly sent my chakra sonar skill pulsing just in case there was another threat that suddenly popped up. I suddenly stopped still and glanced lazily in front of me as my trap detection skill pinged softly. Trap detection, passive, LVL 90, 48.67%. Trap detection allows you to better sense/detect the presence of traps. It is a sub-skill of danger sense due to the fact that not all traps will necessarily be dangerous to you. 90% chance to detect traps. I half-heartedly threw a kunai at the ground ahead of me, causing a pitfall trap to appear. Spikes shot out of the pitfall before kunai rained down from above into the pitfall. No sooner did explosions detonate from within the pitfall, a heat wave spreading out from the trap. My eye twitched. Is she trying to kill me? After the fireworks were over, I blandly looked at the charred ground around the pitfall and simply walked forward. Eventually, after a few more traps, I came across an opening to the room and saw the smiling face of my teacher. I looked around the room, searching for something, before stating plainly, "Where is my present?" The smile on her lips dropped a little. "You wound me. Am I not enough of a prize?" I gave her a dull look to which she shook her head with a smile. "Fine, here you go, kid. I figured this would be helpful due to your large reserves." I caught the scroll she threw my way and smiled when I looked at it. "Would you like to learn Shadow Clone Technique? Y/N. Daily Quest Complete. Training Arc Finale. Objective 1 Reward, plus 5 stat points. Objective 2 Reward, a cool graduation present." "Thank you, teacher," I said. She shrugged before smiling. "I think you could make the most out of that thing, so don't worry about it." She walked up to me and patted my head. "Unfortunately, this is going to be our last training session for a little while. You're going to go on your first mission after all, and it's going to take a good amount of your time. I'm going to miss you," I said softly. The woman looked at me strangely before she started fighting back laughter. "But I'm glad I'm the only one who doesn't find this humorous." Kodo rapidly shook her head. "And no, it's something else, but don't look so down, kid, it doesn't suit you." I nodded and hugged her, my 4 foot 3 inch body only making it up to my 5 foot 8 inch teacher's lower rib cage. A shinobi should be more in control of her emotions. She berated, though there was no heat to her tone. "It's fine, I barely have any," I said, looking up to her. "I don't believe that," she started, looking at me. "I think you simply have a hard time expressing yourself. You're a lot better now than you were in the past." I raised my brow, idly wondering how much more emotionless I could have been before I separated from her. Taking that as her cue, she began to explain. "Tomorrow we will meet with Lord Danzo to get your mission report. Tensions between the villages have already reached the breaking point and skirmishes are already happening between them. I need you to come prepared and stacked." Seeing me nod seriously, she continued, "All right, let's get cleaned up." She paused before she remembered something. "Oh yeah, did you get any spoils from your battle?" I was about to ask her anyway, so I nodded. "Yeah, I got a few things," I replied while taking a single thong, the large pelt, and the red orb from my inventory, making it look like I took it from storage seals. Her eyes widened when she saw the orb, and she whistled appreciatively. "Damn kid, you really have amazing luck. I take it you know what this is then?" She nodded slightly. "Yep, it's very rare for one of these things to appear in a chakra beast. Basically, it's the crystallization of their chakra which occurs after a long period of, usually after decades, and its potency depends on the beast's strength." I held up the red orb to eye level. "So how do I use this?" She suddenly looked at me seriously. To be honest, it's kind of a good thing that you didn't just ingest it or something. Usually, elemental cores are dangerous to individuals who don't have a natural affinity for that element if they don't take the time to absorb it. I paused at that statement. Is it normal for someone to put a random object that they found in the body of an animal in their mouth? I asked oddly. Her face suddenly looked strained. You will meet shinobi in your life that will make you question the definition of normality. Huh. I brought back my attention to the orb and looked at her with a raised brow. I still don't know how to use this. Well, since you have a natural affinity for all elements. Her expression turned annoyed as she stated that. Then absorbing this or any other elemental chakra beast cores won't harm you as long as you know how to do it safely. She then pointed at the orb in my hands and continued, all you have to do is wrap your chakra around the energy in the orb and bring it back into you. It's best to wrap around a little bit at a time to get the most benefits. I nodded and put it away since I could do that later tonight. What do you want with these then? I asked while holding up the thong and pointing at the giant pelt on the ground. I'm going to assume that you have more than one of those fangs, so in that case, it's best to just save them for venom extraction. As for the pelt she pursed her lips, it is pretty good for upgrading your defense, and it will sell well, so take good care of it. We, unfortunately, won't have time to make something out of it, but afterward, we should have time. Thank you, I said, putting them away. She shook her head. Don't worry about it. Now let's get out of here. We both performed shunshin and disappeared from the area. So, you're about to go on your first mission? A red-haired woman asked as we ate around the table. Kodo and I weren't really strangers to this family anymore and were welcome to come here as long as either Minato or Kushina were around. Though nowadays, Kushina didn't go out on missions and stayed at home more, while Minato had been taking fewer missions as of late. The reason? I looked at her now large belly and replied simply, yeah, and it might take a while, though I hope I don't miss the big day. I never actually thought that Kushina had been serious that day when she said she wanted a child. I wondered how much this screwed up my already foggy knowledge of this world. She rubbed her stomach affectionately. Yeah, wouldn't it be nice of you to meet your little sister on day one? I blinked at her statement before hearing Minato's voice. How do you know it's going to be a girl? The blonde asked beside her. On the table around, only Kakashi from his Jinin team was here, while Obito and Rin were most likely with their families. I knew that Obito loved to stay with his grandmother, while Rin had her own family to worry about as well. Kushina looked at him with a smile. Mother's intuition. I bet you that it'll be a girl. Minato suddenly looked interested. Oh? And what are the stakes? The smile on Kushina's face grew wider. If I'm right, you will always have to take care of night duty for the baby whenever you are here. The look of horror on Minato's face made me wonder how bad that actually was. I looked at my teacher and asked curiously, how bad can it be? He doesn't look so good right now. Her look was highly amused as she finished swallowing her food. I've heard stories, Yoro, and if even half of them aren't exaggerations, well, suffice to say that I don't plan on getting a child anytime soon. I raised a brow while continuing to listen to their bet. Kushina was looking smug while Minato was slightly sweating still. What? Are you scared, Minato? He grits his teeth before acquiescing. Fine, but if I win? Kushina put on a thoughtful expression before she leaned forward and whispered into Minato's ear. The man's eyes widened comically before he blushed heatedly and coughed. All right, I think that sounds fair. I wonder what she promised him. You're better off not knowing. I shrugged and continued eating while enjoying the atmosphere of the dining room. Eventually, we all finished our meals, so I helped clear up the table with Kushina and everyone else. I placed my hand out to stop her from continuing any further before taking the plates she was carrying. You shouldn't push yourself too much, especially when you are this close to giving birth. Well, aren't you so sweet, Yoro? You're already so protective of your little sister. she replied, stroking my head. She smiled proudly. Don't worry, Yoro, I'm not some fragile piece of glass. Even like this, I can still devour 20 bowls of ramen no problem. No, that's not something to be proud of. The woman smiled at me kindly before stating, I'm happy for your concern, but I'm a proud Jonin kunoichi of the leaf. If clearing a few dishes while pregnant was all it took for me to be put out of commission, then it would be a disgrace to my status. I nodded my head slowly. After all, she was right. I apologize if I offended you. You don't have to be like that, Yoro, Kushina said with a smile. Now come on and finish up. You've got a long day ahead of you tomorrow, don't you? I nodded and continued clearing up the place. On a side note, I had finally figured out how Kakashi could eat with his mask still on after I asked him once, since I was facing a similar issue. I swore his expression underneath his mask was smug after he had seen mine of disbelief when he told me. To think that the answer had been so simple. I shook my head from those thoughts and focused on cleaning up. After helping Kushina and Minato with cleanup, alongside Kakashi and Kodo, we all relaxed and talked with each other for a while before it was time to leave. Minato looked at me calmly before placing a hand on my shoulder as I said my goodbyes. I don't really know what to tell you to do for your first mission because everyone acts differently. However, make sure to always keep your guard up and never lose your nerves. Thank you, I'll make sure to keep that in mind, Mr. Minato. I replied with a slight bow. He waved off my mannerisms with a smile before Kushina attacked me in a hug, and make sure you don't die before you get to see my baby girl. I'll try not to. Kushina smiled before suddenly blinking. Before I forget. Saying so, she looked towards Minato, whose eyes suddenly widened in remembrance before he disappeared in a swirl of leaves. In but a moment, however, he reappeared with a scroll and handed it over to me. Kushina and I decided to give you a little gift just in case it gets rough out there. I blinked and looked at the scroll in speculation. What's in it? A dark smile made its way upon Kushina's lips as she replied, specially made explosive tags. One of those can easily take out a city block. I raised a brow and looked at the scroll before carefully putting it away. I see, thank you, I said with a short bow. Kushina waved me off. You need to stop being so serious, it really wasn't a big deal. Having said so, she smiled, now make sure you come back alive. I will, was my reply, and with that, I said my goodbyes and gave a quick wave to Kakashi, who was leaving as well, to which he replied with a nod of acknowledgement. Kodo and I left the house and eventually made it back to our home, where we quickly showered. Kodo looked at me as she dried off her damp hair. After this, I'm going to help you absorb that core since it will be beneficial for your development. I nodded my head in understanding before looking at her contemplatively. What about you? Couldn't this also help you out as well? Kodo shook her head while grinning. That's thoughtful, Yoro, but I'm all set. The core doesn't even match any of my elemental affinities, so the amount of time it would take for me to absorb it would be way longer. That's not even mentioning the fact that I would see fewer benefits due to the mismatch of the elemental affinities. I filed away that information as I finished drying off myself and agreed with my teacher's words. With that, I took out the orb from my storage seal and made my way to the bed, my teacher beside me. I can lead you through the process since I'm a sensor and can tell when you are doing something wrong with your chakra. Start by sending out your chakra and try to wrap it around a small amount of energy in the orb. I'll guide you through the process, so don't worry. I listened to my teacher's instructions and focused my chakra outward, visualizing a hand that grabbed a chunk of the energy. Good, now retract your chakra back into your body, with the energy from the core intact, and assimilate it into your chakra core. My eyes closed, I did exactly as she described and carefully brought the energy back into my core. Instantly, I could feel a surging warmth coming from my abdomen that seemed to spread outwards from that epicenter. Kodo placed a hand on my stomach and I could feel her chakra seep into my body before she quickly instructed, now quickly make your chakra flow through your coils with the new energy so that it can assimilate evenly throughout. I did as instructed and felt the warmth spread all over my body. The hot energy of the chakra core fully settled down within me, allowing me the opportunity to repeat the process of absorption a few more times. Eventually, I released a breath when I had drained the chakra, and my teacher looked at me in approval. "Not bad, you caught on quickly." She ran her eyes over my body before placing her hands on my stomach and sensing my chakra. "I can't tell you how much your physical attributes have increased by, but your chakra has improved quite a large amount. Congratulations, your STR has increased by 23. Congratulations, your VIT has increased by 30. Congratulations, your ENGY has increased by 15. Congratulations, natural fire affinity has increased by 10. Congratulations, the skill Second Wind has been granted by reaching 100 VIT. Second Wind, passive, LVL max. When your HP reaches 0, Second Wind allows you instantly recover 10% of your max HP. Can only be used once per day." My eyes widened severely at the notice that had appeared, but before I could think about them further, my body was suddenly racked in pain. Pain so severe that I would have cried out if not for Gamer's mind. I grit my teeth harshly as cold sweat fell down my forehead, and I could feel the veins popping on my head. I felt Kodo wrap her arms around me and pulling me closer. Unfortunately, the other side effect of this is that the large influx of energy and strength your body gets can cause you immense pain. If your body isn't strong enough to handle it, it is very possible you will die. However, I've trained you enough that you should be able to handle this no problem. Just relax your body. I took deep breaths and tried to follow her instruction, relaxing into her warm body. I would have liked to have known this earlier, I said tiredly as I felt my eyes become heavy in fatigue. I felt Kodo rub my head affectionately. "I would have been there for you anyways, Yoru. Just relax." I didn't fight back and let myself succumb to the darkness. JSPOV. Another day, another night, I said as I worked from inside my and Yoru's soul. Unlike my other half, I didn't have to sleep. Besides, there were still many issues I had to work out on this system that I had created. There were only a few more hijinks that I had to fix before it could run autonomously, but it would take quite a while. To me, however, time was pretty much meaningless. "Now then," I said before getting back to work. I still had some things to manage after all. I had been working on a new skill for my other half for a long time, but calculating spatial and temporal vectors was quite the challenge and proved complicated even for me. It's a good thing that I had managed to make a breakthrough after coming to this world, and now the skill was just about finished. I had thought of the best way to introduce this skill to Yoru without making it seem cheap, but the answer had dropped right on my lap. Tomorrow's mission. Yoru's POV. You have slept in a bed. Your HP and MP have fully recovered. I woke up, my body filled with energy, before looking around and noting that Kodo had also gotten up as well. It's good that you're awake. You have a long day ahead of you after all, and you're going to need to be prepared, she stated as she stretched her limbs, though I noted that she looked slightly annoyed and frustrated. Maybe she was upset that I'd be gone for a while? I knew she cared. Don't worry, teacher, I'll make sure to come back alive. I still have much to learn from you after all, I said seriously as I looked at her. Her annoyance and frustration disappeared, in its place thick amusement before she burst out laughing. I looked at her dispassionately. I'm still glad that I'm the only one who cares that we'll be separated for an unknown period of time. She wiped a faux tear from her eyes as she looked at me with an "I know something you don't look, and know it's something else. You'll understand soon." I decided that ignoring the strange woman was best and started to get out of bed and prepare myself. The woman behind me did the same, and in a moment, we were fully clothed in our shinobi clothing. I admired myself in the mirror for a moment after I was fully clothed. My 4-foot 3-inch frame was covered with the standard A&BU equipment, black clothing, a gray flak jacket, metal arm guards and gloves, ninja sandals with spikes for traveling into mountainous regions, and 3 ninja pouches on my back waist. Now all I needed was the signature spiral tattoo on my shoulder to complete the look. My face from the nose downward was covered with a face mask, and I still had the same short white hair covering my head. And those silver eyes, I think they really worked well with me. Since you're ready, then let's go, Kodo said as she too donned her uniform. I noted that she was fully geared up as well and couldn't help but ask, "Are you going on a mission as well?" Oh, look at the time. We have to go. Without even waiting for my reply, she placed a hand on my shoulder and forced me to travel, using her body flicker. In but a moment, our scenery changed and we appeared in an underground cavern place. Kodo simply walked forward and motioned to follow. Eventually, we came upon a door that we waited in front of for a while before Kodo spoke. "We are expected." She walked in, me following behind, and in front of me, I saw the bandaged visage of Danzo looking at us unemotionally. "Lord Danzo," Kodo and I said shortly with a bow. The man in question nodded then spoke. "War has already approached our front door with the borders of our nation being threatened by the advancement of Iwagakure, village hidden by rocks. Your mission is to aid Kusagakure, village hidden in the grass, in pushing back the invasion of Iwa." He paused, letting the information sink in, before continuing. "If the rock village is able to successfully hold a fort in Kusa, then they will be able to lay siege to the border of the Land of Fire, and we cannot let that happen." His voice was firm as he explained. "2 other teams have already left for the mission, so you will rendezvous with them at Kusa. Now he started, looking at me, as an ANBU member, you will have a separate identity, a second skin. Starting from now, whenever you are acting as a member of the ANBU you will be known as Squirrel. Turtle," he yelled. Instantly a form dropped down from above in a kneeling position. "Yes, Lord Danzo." The distinctly male form had on the typical ANBU uniform with a turtle face mask covering his visage. I looked at the individual closely. Name, Turtle. Race, human. Level, LVL 68. HP, 50,000/50,000. CP, 28900/28900. STR, 550. VIT, 500. Dex, 700. Int, 495. WIS, 500. NG, 425. Wait, why is he Turtle if his DEX is the highest? No one answered my thoughts. You will make up the 3rd member of this team with Kodo being the team leader. As you wish, Lord Danzo. The bandaged man nodded. However, my mind was elsewhere, so that's why she looked amused, I thought as I gazed at Kodo's form. Even though it was barely visible because I was standing right next to her, I could see her body slightly shaking as if trying to repress laughter. The entire thing about me missing her now kind of seemed like a joke. However, I inwardly rolled my eyes at her immaturity. Danzo looked at Kodo for a good while before speaking. "Since you have returned to ANBU from inactive duty, you will further be reinstated with your previous name. Is that understood, Dove?" "Yes, Lord Danzo." Kodo, now Dove, stated politely. Danzo nodded his head before taking out a scroll and holding it outwards. Kodo moved forward and took it with a bow. "This contains your mission parameters and for you too," Danzo stated, looking at both Kodo and me. "They also contain your second face. Wear them as proud shinobi of the leaf. Main quest alert. Secure the borders. The 3rd Great Shinobi War has already started. Your mission, should you choose to accept it, you really don't have a choice, is to push back Iwagakure as much as possible so that they can't encroach on the Land of Fire's border. Reward, 500,000 EXP, Skill Book. Failure, death." "Yes, Lord Danzo," we chorused with a bow. The man in question nodded his head before looking at me and stating, "There is one other thing I must do in order to maintain the integrity of Root." "Yoru." I bowed slightly and stepped forward before opening my mouth and sticking out my tongue. With a nod of approval, Danzo took out a stamp and placed it on my tongue. I could sense the chakra flowing from Danzo's body and into the stamp before I felt it travel from the stamp to my tongue. The chakra from the stamp molded itself before settling down, after which Danzo removed it. The secrets of our organization and the village must never be compromised, so I have placed the cursed tongue eradication seal on you should the worst come to pass and you are at the subject of your enemy. That is all. Dismissed. Yes, Lord Danzo, we chorused with a bow for the last time before the elder man went back to his desk work. We took that as the cue to leave and exited the room before Turtle turned to us. I hope that we can work well together as fellow shinobi of the leaf. We are now partners. Likewise. Kodo said simply and I followed. The man nodded before looking at me, and I could feel the atmosphere become serious. I don't doubt Lord Danzo's decision to have you on this mission, however. I would like to ask, this is your first mission, correct? That's right. I said simply. I couldn't tell with his mask on, but his tone became even more severe. Where we are going, we will face enemy shinobi, people that you will be forced to fight and, when necessary, kill. Do you understand? I had understood that the moment I decided to become a ninja during the Third Shinobi War. The moment I agreed to Danzo's proposal almost 2 years ago, I had already lost whatever innocence I might have had. It would be naive to think that I could come out of being a shinobi without a pile of corpses and rivers of blood behind me. So, I completely understood. My eyes made contact with the dark holes that allowed Turtle to see through his mask and emotionlessly replied, I understand. The man looked me back for a while, my teacher by my side, before he shook his head, you understand, but you aren't ready. Before I could even reply, my teacher spoke up, I believe that I have sufficiently prepared him well enough for any eventualities that may occur. She said sternly. The man looked at her before shaking his head again. It may be because you have been inactive for a while, Dove, however, you should remember that a ninja's first kill is nothing that they can prepare for. His tone was somber as he continued, some change after their first skill, pretty much all for the worst. Some drown themselves in odd activities to keep their minds separated from their unfortunate reality. Some go into depression. Some even enjoy their first kill and continue with the act for fun. Few, such as yourself, find meaningful and helpful hobbies that bring them a sense of peace. However, the one thing they all have in common — he turned his gaze back to me — is that they freeze up the first time they are confronted with the choice to take a life. No amount of training can prepare you for that situation. You can only experience it personally and grow through it. Kodo looked at him sharply, however. The man was quick to placate her. I'm not saying that you haven't trained him well enough, or that he doesn't have the skills to do what is necessary. I'm only questioning his resolve. I don't enjoy the fact that we have to use children in war, however. This is the world we live in, and at the bare minimum I wish to make sure that my comrades, regardless of their age, are prepared. She seemed to relax slightly before she replied, I appreciate your concern, Turtle, and I will make sure that my charge is ready. Of course, Captain, I didn't mean to doubt you. He said simply. Kodo nodded, then relax for now. We'll leave it around a half hour, while there is still plenty of daylight, so that we can cover a lot of ground. You know where to meet up. She finished, giving him a knowing look. The man nodded, of course, Captain, I'll see you then. He replied with a short bow and disappeared in a swirl of leaves. Kodo sighed, all right, let's make sure we have everything we need and — she continued, opening the scroll and placing her hand on the center of a storage seal circle. In a puff of smoke, 2 masks appeared, one that had the appearance of a dove and the other a squirrel. This one is for you, she stated, handing me the squirrel mask. I put it on but noted that Kodo looked somewhat down. Are you still thinking about the words Turtle spoke? She sighed before nodding. He's right, you know. Some people never come out of it the same, and you'll be forced to do what you have to. I looked at the woman, but you've turned out all right, haven't you? I saw her flinch for a second, before she smiled somewhat ruefully. Trust me, kid, I've got my own fair share of issues I have to work with. I didn't push further, and we lapsed into a momentary silence before my teacher picked herself up. We have a mission to complete, and I unfortunately never had you experience taking something's life, but she paused, looking at me with a smile. I'll be there for you when the time comes. I looked at her with an impassive gaze, though inwardly I was glad. Thank you. She waved me off. Enough of this sappy crap. But you're the one who started it. I was ignored. We have a mission to complete, so double-check your supplies, and we'll meet Turtle at the rendezvous position. I nodded in agreement. Before looking in my palms. Can I take a life with these, I wonder? 90% of me, the part dominated by cold logic thanks to Gamer's mind, didn't think much about taking a life. It was simply par of course in this world, and it was something I couldn't escape from. Life was meant to end one way or another regardless, and I could always make it painless. I didn't have to like killing, I just had to be willing to do it, if not for anything other than to keep myself alive. Then there was the 10% of my being that was controlled by emotions which told me that killing was wrong and immoral, and that every life was precious. Who was I to decide who lived and who died? Why should I follow the conventions of this world simply because they were expected of me? I could be better, and maybe I could even change this world for the better with my power. Yeah, right. I thought about my emotions. Unfortunately, I was selfish and wanted to live long. I wouldn't be able to do that if I followed my emotions. What I needed was logic dictating my actions in this world. Changing the world? No change came without blood and sacrifice anyway, so regardless I would eventually have to take a life. Humans were unique creatures, each individual with their own thoughts. If I even cared enough to change this world, then there would be people who would oppose me, and saying a few nice words would not be enough at that point. I hated the naive notion that you could change the world, especially one so ravaged by war, if you were nice to everyone around you and stopped killing. It was hilariously childish thinking. True change was fought for over the corpses of others. There was no way around that. Plus, I don't really have the drive to try to change this world. I thought blandly. There were only a few people I bothered to care about in this world, and as long as they were fine and alive, then this place could burn for all I cared. I could blame my dampened emotions on my current thought process, but this was how I truly felt. I was a foreigner here from what my extremely foggy memories told me, and I just wasn't too attached to this place. Konoha was beautiful and great, don't get me wrong, but... Snap out of it, kid. A voice said, shattering my thought process. I noted that Kodo was gazing at me intently. I really hope you aren't like that during the mission, you know? That's a good way to get yourself killed. I'll be fine, just thinking of some stuff. The woman looked at me before stating seriously, I trust that you will be. Now let's get this mission underway. Turtle, Dove, and I hopped from branch to branch, each jump bringing us closer to our destination. Apparently, since Route A and BU were even more secretive than regular ones, we had some kind of secret exit that we used to go on our missions. It was there that we met up with Turtle and made our way out of the village towards our destination. I've already explained the mission parameters, however, I need to make sure we are on the same page. Dove started, her foot launching from a tree branch. We are to rendezvous with the other teams already at Kusa, and help them slow down the advance of IWA long enough for Konoha's main force to arrive. We will use any and all means necessary to achieve victory, is that clear? Yes, Captain. Turtle and I chorused, following behind our team leader. She nodded at our answer, good. It will take us around a day to get to Kusa. If we travel quickly enough including the 6-hour break we will take it around midnight. We'll continue at daybreak, but before then keep your eyes peeled along the way, and don't get distracted. Turtle and I nodded in agreement while continuing to follow the woman. My gaze held the same impassiveness that it always did as I noted the thin beams of light peeking through the densely covered forest ceiling. Kusagakure was located around 900 miles, 1448 kilometers, northwest of Konoha and acted like a buffer between fire country and rock country. The main reason it was being targeted was that it was the only direction that rock country could attack us from efficiently. They would have to take long detours and pass through several of fire country's natural defenses if they wanted to attack us from other angles, but they would still come into contact with other nations who wouldn't take kindly to trespassing shinobi. If IWA tried to force their way through the other buffer nations, then Konoha could use that to their advantage and create more allies by extending aid, and in that way IWA would become at a disadvantage. As long as we were powerful enough in driving them from Kusa, then the first phase of this war would be in our favor. I was catapulted from my thoughts when I saw my teacher raise her right hand in a fist. We'll stop here for now, since it's already late, and set up camp. We've made plenty of progress, so we should be able to make it to our destination soon after we finish resting. Turtle and I showed our agreement and started setting up camp. Storage seals sure are convenient, I thought as I poofed a small tent into existence. As long as you had a great Fuinjutsu master make them, these things would be able to store gigantic amounts of materials. Luckily, Minato and Kushina got the bill. I'll take first watch. Turtle began, looking at Dove. You've been pushing yourself the entire way, no doubt utilizing your chakra sensing capabilities to their fullest. You should rest. Dove seemed to want to protest, however. I decided to step in. No, I'll take first watch. I could almost hear their heads whip towards me before Turtle asked speculatively, are you sure? This should be your first time traveling such long distances continuously. I was actually surprised you were able to keep up so far, but you need to rest, squirrel. Don't push yourself too far. His reasoning was sound and worries well-founded, however. I shook my head and replied calmly, it's fine. I'm an insomniac. What? Dove asked with a harsh whisper. I should have explained that better. I stated simply before shaking my head. Insomniac isn't really the correct term actually. I can sleep just fine if I want to, however, my body doesn't require sleep to function properly. I believe it is another part of my bloodline limit. At this, even Turtle seemed intrigued, not needing sleep but being able to get it whenever you want. You have no idea how many shinobi would be happy with something like that, and it's only part of your bloodline. He looked at Dove. Am I missing something here? I thought we had already told each other of our capabilities and specialties. I thought so as well. Dove replied before looking at me. When were you planning on telling me this? Kodo asked. I felt slightly bad when I sensed the underlying unhappiness in her tone, so I quickly replied, it's not that I didn't want to tell you, but I thought that it just wasn't important enough for you to know. Kodo took off her mask, looking at me with a sigh. To you, it might not have been important, but if your body really didn't need sleep in order to function, then I could have trained you more and gotten you sufficiently prepared. By this time, seeing the atmosphere between Kodo and me, Turtle had decided to retreat to his tent area and focus on setting up. I looked at my teacher, but shook my head. My body may not need sleep, but yours does. I didn't want to push you into doing more than you already had been doing. That's sweet of you, kiddo. She started, but there is no harm in asking if you are really worried about my well-being. I can assure you that I won't die from a little less sleep. She gave me a smile before placing a hand on my shoulder. I know that we all have our own secrets, but I wish that you wouldn't keep something like this from me in the future. I hope that there can be fewer secrets between us in the future. Anything else? I looked at the woman in the eyes, debating whether or not I should tell her about anything else I could do, but I trusted her enough. There is another thing. Kodo looked at me with narrowed eyes before flipping through a few hand seals. I could feel her release a pulse of chakra before she looked at me, a small genjutsu, so that no one can hear us and all they'll see of us two talking to each other. Just in case. I nodded in appreciation before taking out a scroll. I saw one of Kodo's brow raise when she saw me take out the Shadow Clone Jutsu scroll. Would you like to learn Shadow Clone Jutsu? Y/N. I took pleasure in seeing her eyes widen in surprise when I clicked Y and the scroll transformed into motes of light before flowing into my forehead. Congratulations, you have learned Shadow Clone Jutsu. Shadow Clone Jutsu, active, LVL1, 0.00%. The Shadow Clone Jutsu allows you to create a physical copy of yourself with Chakra. Your chakra is divided evenly between each clone you create, however it should be noted that creating too many can be dangerous to you. Each level of this skill will increase the total number of clones you can summon. Maximum number of clones, 1. What? Kodo asked, mouth gaping. I can absorb the information from technique books/scrolls, allowing me to learn any technique as long as it is well written and explained. The only issue is that the scroll/book disappear after I do so, and I only gain elementary proficiency in the technique that I learn. True to being a capable shinobi, Kodo eventually schooled her features before looking up at the night sky and rubbing her temples. I don't even know what to say, but I know that you are causing me a headache. She suddenly stopped before whipping her head towards me. Wait. Is this how you learned those other techniques so quickly? Maybe. She grits her teeth. I had thought that you were just a stupidly amazing genius, but now I know that why you read just a cheat. Jealousy is unbecoming of you, sensei. The woman in question took a deep breath before looking me straight in the eyes and asking me carefully. I get the feeling that I will regret asking, but is there anything else that you want to tell me? I looked at her for a while and she quickly continued, why, you know what? It's best if you simply don't. After all, as shinobi we have to keep our SEC-. I do have another thing I don't mind showing you. Just give me a second, I said, cutting her off and scanning the surroundings. To be honest, I wasn't afraid of her telling Danzo, or even the Hokage, about some of my more unique abilities, since in this world pretty much all strange things could be written off as some weird Kekii Genkai. Hashirama had the ability to make all 9 bijou his bitch using plants, and no one questioned that shit. As a matter of fact, people barely even questioned the existence of bijou, simply seeing them as masses of sentient chakra or malevolent energy, yet barely even wondering how they were created. They just took 100+ feet tall behemoths in stride. My abilities could only be classified as moderately strange in comparison. Let's not even get started about how the Uchiha could manifest a gigantic humanoid energy construct from their eyes. That shit made no sense. And neither did my abilities. However, if there was anything I wasn't willing to do, it would be giving her, or anyone, knowledge about what my ability truly was. That was a secret I would take with me to the grave. I was broken from my musings when I heard a light sound of movement coming from the grass to the right of me. I reacted almost instantaneously, drawing a kunai from my pouch and launching it at the creature. I was rewarded with the sound of metal sinking in flesh and the death cries of the innocent animal I had just killed. I walked up to it, Kodo gazing at me intently, before I picked it up and brought it back. Rabbit. HP, 0/100. Would you like to loot the enemy and allow only the necessary drops to remain? Y/N. I looked my teacher in the eye and clicked yes. I enjoyed the look on her face as the rabbit disappeared into motes of light which traveled to the ground, leaving me with prime slabs of meat and a perfectly skinned hide. My ability also allows me to collect the essential resources from dead creatures. I am under the assumption that the useless parts, that my ability doesn't collect, go into the ground and become fertilizer or something, judging by the fact that the lights disappear underground. Not hearing a reply, I looked at my teacher worriedly. Teacher? Do you understand how indispensable this ability of yours is? How do these skills even relate to your Kekii Genkai? I had thought that your bloodline had to do with your physical body's ability to rapidly adapt to any and all stimuli placed on it, but how does this coincide with that at all? Teacher. I mean, sure, if we force it, we can assume that your body is allowing you to adapt quickly by allowing you to absorb information through books or scroll. And maybe it is adapting to its surroundings by removing the need to manually procure and skin animals, but they just don't make sense. Teacher. Kekki Jinkai manifest in a single ability. The first has the wood release, the Uchiha have the Sharingan, and the Uzumaki have their longevity in chakra chains, but them having two abilities as part of their bloodline actually makes sense. Master. I mean they have such large amounts of chakra, and it is so dense that the manifesting chains made out of the stuff is actually logical. I mean, have you ever felt Kushina's chakra? I have to fight the urge to run from her every time I get close, she just has too much. Mom. That got her attention. She narrowed her eyes at me and flicked my head. -10. Ow. She shook her head and composed her emotions professionally before looking at me. There's a lot I want to talk to you about, but I already feel like this night has been long enough. I'll let you keep watch, but I want you to take a break eventually and allow Turtle to watch after you. You may not need sleep to function, but I don't want to take any chances. Are we clear? I nodded my head seriously before she continued, make sure to use your chakra sensing abilities as often as you can. You said that your range is around 650 meters, correct? I nodded my head, to which she explained, it's a short distance for a seasoned shinobi, and can be covered in seconds. However, that should be enough time for you to alert us. If you catch any suspicious movement, do not hesitate to warn us. I understand. I would not take a risk with our lives. Good. She started before getting up, I'll let Turtle know of our plan. For now, keep your eyes peeled, and save that rabbit meat for tomorrow. I smiled at the last point before Kodo made a hand seal, pulsing her chakra and removing the genjutsu, before she walked away. I sighed before plopping on the ground and taking a meditative position before my mind went through a lot of information. Almost 2 years. My first mission. I would most likely have to take a life. My brows crinkled and I shook my head from those thoughts before I focused on something more productive. I brought my attention to my station to see how much it had improved and to note what I would need to work on. Status. Name, Yorodon. Race, human. Level, LVL 40 next level, 1, 250/82, 100. HP, 18195/18195 Regen, 318.41 per min. CP, 37537/37537 Regen, 732.00 per min. CC, 95%. STR, 172.9. VIT, 195.7. Dex, 136.8. Int, 200.1. WIS, 190.9. NG, 384. Points, 292. Rio, 1000. It's grown a lot. I thought as I gazed at the hovering screen. The bonuses I had received from the core had been added to my base attributes, further increasing them with my skill bonuses. I had asked Kodo earlier about these increases, but of course getting easy stats was impossible. She had explained to me that chakra cores were very rare, and that even if you killed a beast that was a century old, it was not guaranteed that you would even get one. Furthermore, these things were obviously highly sought after and stupidly expensive, so people usually kept these things to themselves whenever they were found. I would be lucky to find another one in the next decade or so, apparently. I sighed and shook my head. Nothing worth getting is ever easy. I then focused my attention on my chakra control and narrowed my eyes. Obviously, after training with Kodo for a while, I had learned and practiced the water walking technique alongside perfecting the tree climbing and leaf concentration exercises. Water walking, active/passive, LVL 25 max. Water walking is a more advanced chakra control exercise, and by expelling chakra from your feet to repel the watery surface, you are able to stand firmly upon it. Increases CC by 25%. Uses, 35 CP per min. Tree climbing, active/passive, LVL 25 max. Tree climbing uses your chakra to stick to surfaces. You can now move more freely and better use your chakra. Increases CC by 25%. Uses, 25 CP per min. Leaf concentration practice, active/passive, LVL 25 max. The leaf concentration technique is an introductory chakra control exercise taught to all academy students. This training method is done by placing a leaf over your forehead and directing your chakra onto the leaf, using it as a focal point. Every level, a new leaf can be added. This technique helps hone your concentration. Increases CC by 25%. Uses, 15 CP per min. Combined, I had gained a 75% increase in my chakra control, and adding that to my base CC of 20%, I now had 95% CC. I had asked Koto if there were any ways to further increase my control, but she had only looked at me strangely and replied, "To be honest, Yoro, your control is by far the most perfect I have ever felt. The way your chakra fluidly obeys your command as it flows through you and the speed at which you can cast your jutsu. I had the pleasure of watching Lady Tsunade as she worked once, and your chakra control is just as great, if not better, than her own. It's perfect." However, the problem is that it isn't. I said to myself as I recalled that memory. They couldn't see a numerical value of their chakra as I could, and I was pretty sure that my other half wasn't just messing with me, so that had to mean that my control wasn't truly perfect. The issue was that I could train no further in the other techniques, which left me wondering how else I could improve my CC to perfection. What would happen once I did? I had a theory that to pretty much all shinobi, individuals who had a CC of 90% or greater would be classified as having perfect control, and this was only due to the fact that no one here could actually quantify how perfect their control was. But I could. However, that left the question, how can I actually perfect my control to 100%? My brows knitted in thought. My CC is at 95%, where is the other 5% going to come from? I activated my meditation skill as I crossed my legs. I made sure to set my chakra sonar skill, so that it would automatically pulse every 0.5 seconds before focusing on myself. 5%. Why is there only 5% left? Where does it come from? How do I train now? My brain calculated numerous possibilities and drew from the knowledge that I had on chakra theory. When I had gained eidetic memory from getting 50 in INT, I had been able to recall all the information that I had studied that I hadn't been able to before. That included the information I gained from the books Koto had me study, and the more advanced ones she had gotten me after. 5%, 5, why 5? What can I do with the chakra that would give me 5% more control to perfection? Wait, what are the other aspects of chakra? Physical and spiritual energy, created from cells, but what is an aspect of chakra that could give me 5%? I felt my brain turn, but I calmed down and rationalized, using my hyperfocus skill to its maximum capability. Hyperfocus, active, level 2, 64.57%. Can use it per day. Usage, 2 per day. Duration, 65.48 minutes. A fact I found was that hyperfocus didn't apply to just skills as well, but also my thoughts. I could hyperfocus on a singular thought in my mind, and to the point where it consumed my other thought processes. 5 aspects of chakra. Wait. 5 elements. Chakra is divided into 5 main elements. What if I need to perfect my control over the main aspects of my chakra in order to gain absolute perfect control? For figuring out how you can further improve your chakra control past normal standards, you have gained plus 10 INT and plus 10 WIS. My eyes shot open, and I breathed out a sigh. This had been bugging me for a long time, but considering I had always been either training or sleeping, or just focusing on other things, I had never had the time to sit down and think about it like now, since there was rarely a time where I could just be by myself and relax. Besides, it hadn't been on my mind until recently. I stood up and decided to keep my focus, though I was slightly distracted as I contemplated my discovery. Mastering control over all the elements wouldn't be hard, however. It would be insanely time-consuming, but hopefully, the gains would be well worth it. I truly wondered what having full 100% control over my chakra entailed. After all, chakra was just another form of energy, so maybe I would be able to shoot techniques around easier. But the time. It had taken me a year to increase my natural lightning affinity to 25%, and my natural water affinity was only at 20%. If I wanted to train in even more affinities, it would take me years before I could perfect them to a full 100%. Thankfully, the answer to my problem was in my hands. Shadow Clone Jutsu, I thought, and with a single hand seal, a copy of me appeared. We looked at each other, both of our gazes impassive. So, you're my clone? I guess so. How does it feel to understand that your existence is just a construct of energy that can be controlled and ended by the will of some other being? My clone paused, before replying. To be honest, because of that, I fear neither death nor pain, because any small amount of it would probably kill me anyway. I have to say that not having to worry about things such as life, death, hunger, thirst, it's all kind of freeing. I don't have to worry about anything that isn't related to the reason I was brought to being. Interesting. We continued to look at each other before I asked, and what if I simply had no objective in creating you? What if I just asked you to live your life however you wanted? The copy of me shrugged. I suppose I would do whatever you would do until I got bored and dispelled myself. I sighed. That's actually quite enviable. Since he was me, I could tell that he was smiling under his mask. I put it on the back on my mind to work on that smile that Kakashi hadn't shown yet. Somehow could remember that future Kakashi had an eye smile, yet I couldn't remember anything important. I couldn't even remember the circumstances surrounding Naruto's birth. Wait, would he even still be born? Oh well. I looked back at my clone and said simply, I'm going to practice this technique, so I'll have to dispel you. There's a lot about this technique that I want to test out in the future, like dash. If you can get EXP from clones, and if so, not much. I smirked. I like talking to myself. That's sad. No one asked you. No, but I am you. Just dispel already. I swear he looked smug before he burst into smoke and disappeared. I was definitely too smart for my own good. Chapter 6. After practicing with my shadow clone technique for hours, while simultaneously keeping my chakra sonar skill on, I had eventually let Turtle take over for me and had gotten some sleep. Around 3 hours later, I was woken by the man with Dove already awake and ready. The rest of the journey to Kusa was relatively peaceful, but we all had been careful and vigilant the entire way there. My thoughts were disrupted as we slowed down and eventually stopped. We're here, Dove stated as we arrived near the entrance of the village. I gazed at it impassively and appreciated the look and structure of the visible areas of the village. Kusagakure no Sato was surrounded by rich vegetation all around, giving it an earthy feel somewhat similar to Konoha. Halt! A shout echoed out, causing us to focus forward. A man came forward wearing a headband with a symbol that looked like 3 blades of grass curved in the same direction. He looked at us seriously. Please state your business here. Dove inclined her head. We are Konoha shinobi who have come to aid Kusagakure in repelling the invading forces of IWA. She slowly took out the mission statement scroll from her pouch and presented it to the man. This is proof of our statement. The man gave it a cautious look before walking up and slowly taking it. He created some distance and carefully opened the scroll and scanned through the contents. After a while he put down the scroll and looked at us with a smile, sighing in relief. The Hokage's seal is authentic. I apologize for earlier, but we can never be too careful, especially in these times. That would explain the 20 other chakra signatures surrounding us. Dove said simply. 20, that's dangerous. I thought. The man's smirk remained on his face before he made a few hand signals, probably to his hidden companions, before welcoming us inside. Welcome to Kusa. I would tell you that you'll enjoy your stay, but I try not to lie to my allies. Dove looked at him with humor in her tone. We'll try to make do with the circumstances. We moved through the village quickly, keeping pace with the Kusa ninja, before he stopped in front of a decent-looking, large, multi-story complex. This is where you'll be staying when you aren't in the front lines, courtesy of Kusa. The top 2 floors are empty, so you can lounge there as you like. He then turned to face us. The other Konoha shinobi should be back soon. You can rendezvous with them here. He then smiled before bowing quickly. Kusa extends its sincere thanks for your aid. With that, the man disappeared in a swirl of grass. Huh. Neat. Alright, keep your guard up while we are here. IWA can attack at any moment, so we need to be prepared. I'll convene with the captains of the other groups when they arrive and exchange information with them. In the meantime, you two can scout the area and restock any supplies we might need and come back here after you're done. Dismissed. Turtle and I nodded in response and casually picked a room after we entered the building. Afterward, we made our way out and separated in order to observe the landscape. The tension in the village was thick and easily noticeable. People were moving around cautiously, making sure to stay on the sides of the road, while some others were shifty-eyed and scanning each corner for danger. There also weren't many people out and about to begin with, even though it was still early in the morning. I kept my gaze stoic as I gazed upon those people's fast shuffling forms and shook my head. Most of them were just simple people with honest lives and families to take care of, but that didn't stop them from being inflicted from the effects of the war. I took a breath before going through a single hand sign, creating a puff of smoke beside me. My little show brought me little more than a fleeting glance from the pedestrians who ignored me soon after. My 4 clones nodded, went off to scout the perimeter and obtain any information about Kusa's defensive capabilities. With that, I continued to stroll down the street with an impassive gaze. So, we're all here. A giant of a man spoke, his figure imposing and his arms crossed. He wore the standard Umbu outfit, complete with the spiral tattoo on his shoulder. The top of his head was covered with short, spiky, orange hair, and on his face was a mask depicting a boar. We were all currently located in the first-floor living room of the building that Kusa had allowed us to lounge in. Right before the 2 other Konoha shinobi groups had arrived, Dove had sent a clone to come get me, knowing that I was on the other side of town. She could sense and recognize chakra signatures anywhere in a 20-kilometer, 12.42-mile, radius according to what she told me. Being such a good sensor sure was convenient. It appears so. The 3rd group has finally arrived. A female voice sounded out as a blonde-haired woman looked at us. She wore the same standard uniform and tattoo, but this time her mask was that of a wolf. The only reason I could tell that it was a wolf and not a dog on that mask was that I looked at her status. She and Boar were quite powerful, to say the least. Dove nodded. We took a longer route to make our way here and faced no issues. Wolf nodded after scanning us, but I could swear she looked at me a second longer before she returned her gaze towards Dove. And, is your team prepared? Why did I feel like that was about me? Dove's voice turned hard. We were personally chosen by Lord Danzo. If you have any concerns about our ability, please bring it up with him. Boar watched them for a moment before shaking his head in disapproval. Enough. We have more important things to worry about. IWA has become more aggressive in their movements, bringing in slightly higher level ninjas each time they fail their invasion. We need to find a way to push them back long enough for our main reinforcements to arrive. My team has 2 sensors, Squirrel and I. Turtle can be useful in reconnaissance due to his great natural speed in conjunction with his swift release. We can scout out invasion points IWA might use, and give reports of the number and strength of their shinobi. Dove explained. Was I the only one bothered by the fact that Turtle was our fastest shinobi? This works out perfectly. Boar said, pleased. My team is more focused on attack and defense while Wolf's team excels in stealth and espionage. Having your team, however, will allow us to more safely scout out the opposition, helping us reduce casualties. Wolf nodded in agreement. We can communicate this to the Kusa shinobi, so that they can allow us to cover more ground. So far we have been splitting up our efforts on watching the border, with Kusa watching over the majority of their border with IWA. Turtle put on a thoughtful expression before he suddenly asked, would it not be better to work with the Kusanine in defending parts of their border instead of splitting the workload between us? I'm sure that they are more familiar with the layout of the land than we can ever be in the short time we've been stationed here. Wolf sighed lightly. Usually that would be true, especially when we have such small squad numbers, but unfortunately, even though Konoha and Kusagakure are our allies, our ninjas simply operate too differently. Over time we will be able to synchronize our efforts, especially when reinforcements arrive, but for now, splitting up our workload is more beneficial. Turtle nodded his head in understanding before Boar spoke up. Any other questions? It's best for us to be on the same page. Seeing that no one else spoke up, Boar continued, all right, let's plan out our next course of action. The meeting delved into an information exchange where the shinobi all communicated their experience and difficulties, and how to maximize their results. I was forced to take in all this information and commit it to memory, not because I had to, but because eidetic memory didn't allow me to forget anything that I picked up. Eventually, the meeting was concluded and Boar stated, let's stay vigilant and start our plan when the sun starts to set, around the time that IWA is most likely to attack. Any objections? Seeing no one spoke up, the man nodded, then, make sure to keep yourselves alive. With that, he and his team disappeared in a swirl of leaves. Wolf looked at us and soon left as well with her team in tow. All right, let's move out. Dove started, standing up from her position before looking at Turtle and me. Make sure you use a clone when you are doing your reconnaissance, Turtle. If it is spotted, then make sure you have it run away and hide instead of immediately dispelling in order to lead the enemies. We want them to believe that your clone is you, increasing the likelihood that they will move to capture you. If they figure out that you are a clone beforehand, they'll be more on guard since they'll figure that their position has been compromised. Of course, Captain. Leave it to me. Turtle said earnestly. Dove inclined her head before looking at me, and Squirrel, don't stray too far from me. With your reserves, you should be able to make a good amount of shadow clones, correct? I nodded in agreement. As of now I can create around 4 clones, but I'll need more practice to increase that number. I learned the technique quite recently after all. Turtle whistles at me in appreciation. You're able to safely create shadow clones at your age? You must have some serious reserves, kid. They're all right. I replied. 4 is good enough for now. Dove said, getting us back on track, what I need you to do is send your clones in pairs. We can use the fact that your sensory skills may alert the enemy to our advantage. If you sense the enemy, and they start to shift their position towards you, you can have one of the clone pairs dispel, and give you the information while the other clone pair can lead them away. Most IWA shinobi are stubborn, and such blatant flaring of your chakra will most likely provoke them into attacking you. It was a pretty interesting plan, but I showed some doubts. Even if they are stubborn, they are still seasoned shinobi. I doubt this plan will work on them every time, if at all, since it is quite obvious. It doesn't have to. We mainly need to stall them, so if they become too cautious to attack, then it works in our favor. If they become provoked into attacking, well, you can just lead them around until they either get tired or fall into a trap. Either way, it benefits us. Huh. Were you always so smart? Kodo promptly flicked me in the head. Worse, Turtle dared to snicker at me. All right, let's move out. Dove said before she stood up, us following her movements before we all activated Shunshin and disappeared from our area. Day turned to night as the sun rose from the east and set in the west. Dove, Turtle, and I were in the forested areas of the northern part of Kusa, which served as the barrier between the land of rock and Kusa. The terrain here was actually kind of weird due to the fact that the land was very rocky, yet the soil could support such large vegetation. "Your clones haven't picked up anything yet?" Dove asked beside me. I shook my head in the negative. None of them have dispelled, so I can only assume they haven't made contact with the enemy yet. Dove nodded. "Very well, but stay on your guard." We moved silently through the rocky forest, making sure to keep low and mask our movements. In but a few moments we were half a kilometer from our previous position before Turtle suddenly tensed up sharply. My clone came into contact with a group of rock shinobi, 8 members, 6 of which acted subordinate to the last 2. He was able to lure them towards us before losing them and dispelling. Turtle looked forward before turning his head slightly to the right. They are approximately 30 kilometers, 19 miles, to our northeast and should be heading in our direction. Dove took to the trees and we followed. It might be 2 different 3-man squads led by Jonin commanders. I'll keep a lookout for any foreign signatures, but be on your guard just in case. There was no argument as we followed the instructions of our leader. We moved silently towards our northeast direction for around 10 seconds before Dove perked up. "They've entered my range of detection. 5 Chunin level chakra signatures, 1 around Tokubetsu Jonin level and 2 Jonin levels." She quickly created a clone which she dispelled soon after. My clones with the other 2 groups should be alerted to our situation. All we need to do is stall for time and distract them. I'll handle the Jonin. Turtle, use their anger at you to draw out as many of the Chunin as you can, and Squirrel, I'm sure you can handle the rest. I nodded seriously and continued following my leader at high speeds. However, it only took less than 30 seconds before we met up with the opposition coming in our direction. "They're here," Dove said silently, signaling us to stay up in the trees. Coincidentally, the rock shinobi stopped their movements as well before one of them, a guy around 15, sneered, "All those fucking tree huggers are the same. As soon as they see us, they run and hide like insects." His compatriots agreed before one of the larger individuals, probably one of the 2 Jonin leaders, spoke up. "It's true that they are slippery, but you have to admit that they at least stick to what they are good at." His eyes turned sharply towards our direction in the foliage, hugging trees. At his epithet, all 8 enemy shinobi, in a fluid motion, drew their kunai and launched them towards us. All 3 of us dispersed, causing the kunai to either hit bark or fly through the tree leaves. Dove launched sharp needle projectiles at the 2 Jonin in a bid to catch their attention. They were most likely coated in poison like the one she had used to kidnap me almost 2 years ago. No. I wasn't still sour about that. It worked as one of the Sinbon grazed the shoulder of the previously trash-talking Jonin, his kunai failing to deflect the numerous projectiles. His face twisted in agony at the fast-working poison, and he cried out in slight pain. "You fucking bitch!" he roared as he charged into the foliage. His Jonin comrade, a woman with black hair, barked out a few orders. "There shouldn't be many of them, so stick together and take them out," she yelled before following her brash companion. I had quickly scanned all their levels beforehand, so I knew that, when Turtle had suddenly sped out and blown away one of the remaining 6 rock shinobi, that he had attacked the one who had Tokubetsu Jonin levels of chakra. The man impacted the trees at astonishing velocity, breaking through a few of them and causing splinters to fly. The rest of the IWA shinobi froze for a moment at Turtle's sudden appearance before they snarled. "Why you?" "Enough." A voice sounded out, causing the rock ninja to stop and turn his gaze towards the fallen trees. The Tokubetsu Jonin threw away one of the tree trunks on top of him and dusted himself off. His clothes were slightly tattered, but otherwise, he looked perfectly fine from the attack. "Your love tap can't even break through my rock skin," he said as he turned towards Turtle. He looked at my direction before sneering and stating to his comrades, "3 of you help me tie down that slippery bastard, the last 2 of you should be able to take care of the kid." He then dashed towards the now retreating Turtle with his comrades in tow. That now left me with 2 rock shinobi. Interestingly enough, one of them was the kid who had insulted us earlier. The other one was a female with dark brown hair who looked to be around 16 or so. Rock Shinobi 1M. Level 43. HP, 20,000/20,000. CP, 7,500/7,500. His name is irrelevant, all you need to know is that he wants to kill you. Rock Shinobi 2F. Level 40. HP, 15,000/15,000. CP, 9,000/9,000. Her name is irrelevant, all you need to know is that she wants to capture or kill you. As I finished scanning the rest of their stats, the black-haired boy turned his gaze towards my direction before he suddenly looked startled. I guess he had never actually noticed me before as his eyes widened in surprise before he started laughing. Ha ha. Oh, this is rich. Are those fucking tree huggers so pathetic that they have to send a kid to a battlefield? And a squirrel? He sneered before looking at me mockingly. Listen kid, I'll do you a solid and make your death painless, courtesy of the Rock. I looked at him strangely, though I doubt he could see my expression under my mask. Was that supposed to be a bad pun? He looked confused before the girl next to him widened her eyes in realization. Oh, I get it, rock solid. The boy looked irritated before he snarled, you know what? Now I'm going to make your death excruciating. But I actually thought it was kinda funny. He didn't seem to think so. With a cry of outrage, he dashed towards me, to which I hurriedly unfurled 2 shuriken from my pouch and threw them towards him. However, I raised a brow when they simply bounced off his skin. The only reply I got in return was a sneer as he used his long reach to his advantage, rocketing a fist towards my masked visage. I ducked under his swing and, while grabbing his outstretched arm, used his momentum to throw him over my shoulder. He flipped in midair and landed softly on the ground. However, my danger detection suddenly went off, causing me to jump straight into the air, narrowly avoiding the earth spikes that had emerged from my previous position. I turned my head and noted that the girl's hand position was fixed in a hand seal before she looked at me seriously. Don't underestimate the kid. Regardless of our feelings about the leaf, they're not stupid enough to send someone weak to the front lines. He must be really skilled as a shinobi for his age. The guy frowned before he grinned sinisterly at my direction. Killing someone so young, but talented from the leaf dash. He smacked his lips. There's nothing more pleasurable. He screamed as he lunged at my direction. Instead of moving backward, however, I went forward to confront him with more shuriken in hand. I threw them at him, but of course, they only bounced off his skin. His natural reflex, however, had been to close his eyes for a single moment, which was all I needed for my plan. I had thrown the shuriken knowing that they would bounce on his defensive technique, and with that in mind, I used it to my advantage. One of the shuriken ricocheted off of him and towards his partner, causing her eyes widened at the incoming projectile. She quickly reacted and ducked under the unexpected attack, causing it to impact the tree behind her. The girl looked at me in trepidation, focusing on my every move, however not before I had used their momentary distraction to carefully seep my chakra into his and his partner's system. Illusion Mastery, active, level 75, 56.76%. Illusion Mastery embodies the level of achievement you have in casting illusions. Each level increases the of your illusions affecting your opponents. 75% chance of illusion success. -1% per level your opponent exceeds you by. Due to my amazing chakra control, when I had begun studying Genjutsu, I had improved very quickly at the art. Koto also made it mandatory for me to learn some medical ninjutsu, but there were just so many things that I had to study which made it nearly impossible for me to dedicate much time for the art at all. Nevertheless, I decided to focus on the matter at hand. This must be the rock skin. Dove's needles must have been coated in chakra for them to puncture the jonin, but this still works fine. I thought idly, ducking under one of his blows and making sure to keep track of his female companion movements. Why won't you stay still? The guy yelled, yet his movements never faltered, and he kept his attacks sharp and precise. I like living. Not as hot-headed as he seems, the girl seems to play mid-range support. I made sure to use my eidetic memory to my advantage by memorizing their movements in order to exploit any weakness in them. We continued this game of cat and mouse where the guy would rush me, utilizing his greater build and defense to his advantage, while his partner would support him from behind. The battlefield was littered with all the shuriken that I had thrown at the boy, all of which failed to penetrate his skin. Our movements were immensely quick, and the entire battle had consisted of hundreds of exchanges in no more than a few minutes. The guy looked around at the battlefield, no doubt taking note of my failed attempts at harming him, before he mocked with a sigh, "Look kid, if all you can do is run around and attack me with those scrap pieces of metal, then you might as well give up and drop dead now. It'll be less painful." I looked at him apathetically. "I don't have to beat you, I just keep you here for now." The man's eyes widened before he chuckled, and soon those chuckles turned into full-blown laughter. The girl next to him looked at me with thick amusement in her visage. "You think you Leaf Neen are the only ones capable of using diversion tactics?" My eyes widened, not from her information, but the one I had received from one of my two clone pairs. There was a group of shinobi currently located far outside Kodo's range that was heading for us at high speeds. 2 3-man squads of high chunin to jonin level fighters, with a Tokubetsu jonin, who didn't seem to be part of their squads. Judging by their trajectory, they would probably make contact with our reinforcements before they made it here. The Konoha shinobi here had split guarding the Kusa border with their ninja. Konoha focused on around 200 kilometers, 124 miles, of the eastern part of Kusa's IWA/Kusa border, while their ninjas focused on the remaining 950 kilometers, 590 miles. We obviously overlapped in certain areas of our patrol. However, Dev has already notified us that there hadn't been any Kusa ninja in our 20 kilometers vicinity, only us Konohanin. I looked at the two still smirking ninja and commented, "You had another ninja with you, but they probably splintered off far before Turtle made contact. They somehow knew he was coming and left to notify another group of your shinobi." My eyes narrowed slightly, a censor. The IWA pair stopped smiling before the boy looked at me seriously. "I'm not sure how you got that information, but sometimes knowing too much isn't a good thing, kid." In war, I beg to differ. "Cheeky fucker." The guy yelled with a grin before he rushed towards me with his larger build. "Let's see how you talk with your throat ripped out." I leaped into the air before tossing more shuriken at my charging adversary, but he knocked them away in annoyance. "I've said it before, but if that's all you can do, then just drop dead already." He leaped after me, as I landed on the top of a tree branch, before he lashed out with a vicious kick. I could almost feel the air compressing from the force of the attack, and I hurriedly ducked before I lost my head. The half of the tree above me was wrecked as it splintered into numerous pieces. However, with me now under his outstretched leg, his weakness was exposed. Every man's weakness. "You bitch!" he yelled as I smashed his family jewels, causing him to fall off the tree and plummet to the ground. Rock skin or not, no man could take that hit without issue, unless they weren't a man. "I'm going to enjoy torturing you." He stayed harshly as he shakily picked himself off the ground with tears in his eyes. "All's fair in love and war, and this is war." He didn't seem to agree. "ARRG." he yelled as he charged at me like an enraged bull, but before I could move to escape, the landscape behind me changed as a huge wall of rocks blocked my path. "There's nowhere to run, little bastard." My opponent yelled as his female partner stood behind him, looking at me seriously with a hand seal in place. I could see the manic grin of assurance on the boy's face as he edged closer to me, intent on causing me harm. However, it's about time I stopped running anyway. From the beginning, I had been making sure to analyze their movements and personalities to increase my advantage. The boy seemed brash and easily angered, but he never actually made too many mistakes in his fight and seemed to have a decent head on his shoulders despite his personality. The girl played support and seems to have a more analytical mind where she used her earth techniques to box off or manipulate her opponent's movements and cover for her teammates' weaknesses. I could more or less predict how they would react to certain actions and how they would move. Which was why when the boy seemed about ready to secure his victory, his face couldn't help but twist in surprise as his movements suddenly halted. What? I can't move. Something's wrapped around my body. His partner behind him screamed in surprise. The boy looked at me, flames nearly visible in his eyes, as he snarled. What retarded tricks did you fucking use, bitch? The guy yelled as he tried to break the restraint on his body through sheer force. I grunted slightly in exertion before I twitched my right index and ring finger. Suddenly, the guy's arms clamped straight to his sides, as his efforts went to waste, and he roared in fury, "Bastard!" The woman behind him looked at me, sweat dripping from her brows, as she stated, "I can't see any restraints on me." Her eyes suddenly widened, "Genjutsu." Her partner widened his eyes before he smirked in my direction, "You think this petty trick can hold me?" He suddenly opened his mouth and bit down hard on the tip of his tongue, before smirking as clarity returned to him, the other IWA ninja following suit. However, what the fuck? He screamed as he noted that he was still bound, but now he could see the culprit that had been previously invisible to him. Wrapped around him and his partner was high-quality, chakra conductive, black metal wire. How? When? The shuriken. His partner yelled as she looked at me in trepidation. It was only then that he noticed that the field which had been littered with shuriken was now devoid of any, and instead all the star-shaped projectiles were wrapped around him and his partner along with the wire. Why you? I would usually not bother to explain. I started, before looking at the trees beside me, but I think I have enough time to humor you. Ignoring his snarl, I continued while gazing at him lazily. Every shuriken I had thrown at you was wrapped with high-quality ninja wire which was connected to me. I blocked you from seeing the wire with genjutsu and analyzed your movements, so that I could trap you efficiently. I finished while bringing their attention to both my hands which was wrapped with wire, all of which connected to the ones that restricted their movements. This can't hold me. He yelled as he tried to push his arms outwards to break my hold, yet I replied by slowly closing my right hand in a grip. His movements halted as both his arms and legs clamped together, and he glared in my direction. While you are normally stronger than me, I started explaining. With your current limited mobility, the amount of force you can exert has been lowered drastically. Give up, you've lost. The man ceased his attempts, but looked at me in disdain. Even if we can't move, you won't be able to damage us either, not with those toothpicks. We're at a stalemate. Normally that would be true, however. I flipped through a few hand seals, causing the two ninjas to move erratically at the motions of my fingers. God, hand seals were inconvenient. I completed my actions, relishing in their looks of surprise. Just because I haven't used ninjutsu, doesn't mean I can't. And I continued looking at them emotionlessly. Lightning dominates Earth, and I'm sure that your rock skin technique is Earth-based. Before they could even voice out curses or pleas, I allowed my chakra to flow and vibrate before lightning appeared in both my hands. The electrical energy flowed through the metal wires, as they conducted the energy, and into the bodies of the two ninjas. Critical. 550% NG equals 2112. 2112 plus damage bonuses equals 3505. 3505 times 2 is equal to 7010. Rock Shinobi 1M. Level 43. HP 12990/20,000. Critical. 550% NG equals 2112. 2112 plus damage bonuses equals 3505. 3,505 times 2 is equal to 7,010. Rock Shinobi 2F. Level 40. HP, 7990/15,000. They screamed in agony as lightning literally coursed through their veins from my lightning strike, easily bypassing their earth-based armor. They dropped to the ground, electricity arcing from their down forms, and their bodies twitching, as they glared at me. "You, bastard dash. Not bad, kid." A feminine voice sounded out as a woman with a wolf mask appeared next to me. "Not bad at all for your first time out." My enemies looked at her in shock as the female rock ninja called out reinforcements? How? The woman barely regarded her before she threw something she had been holding in her hand in front of them. It rolled to the ground and stared straight into their eyes. A severed head. "You bitch!" The boy yelled, seeing the decapitated head of his comrade, yet Wolf didn't even pay attention to him. "How long have you been watching?" I asked. "Around the middle," was her reply before she looked at my victims. "So, what do you plan on doing with them?" Ignoring their heated glare, I replied blandly, "No clue. They'll probably be useful for information or something. Like we would tell you leaf fuckers shit." He yelled before glaring straight at Wolf, "I swear if I get out of here, I'll make you my fucking bitch." He suddenly chuckled madly looking at Wolf's masked visage. "It's true when they say that your mask is a representation of your true self. I bet you enjoy moaning like a dog in heat." The brown-haired Konoha Anbu didn't even react to his words as she looked at me. "You've never killed another person before, correct?" "No." She nodded before looking at the now slightly alarmed faces of the two IWA ninja. "Then it's time you experience the more desolate aspects of shinobi life." Her gaze concentrated on the female before moving to the male. "My team has already captured one of the enemy shinobi, but we can use one of them to fact-check the information they give us. We only need one, however, so dash," she looked back at me, "kill the boy." At this moment, the clouds parted allowing lighter from the moon to shine upon the earth, granting me the ability to see the increasingly pale faces of the land of rock shinobi. The boy then looked at me before he sneered, "Come on kid, what are you waiting for? Or are you so spineless that you can't deal the finishing blow, huh? Do it." I looked at Wolf, who gazed at me through her mask, before returning my gaze towards the IWA shinobi, and pulling a kunai from my pouch. With quiet steps, I made my way towards him before looking at his down form. The boy suddenly spit at my face, but I simply tilted my head, and it flew past me. "Do your worst, kid. If you even have the balls," he taunted. My gaze never left his as my mind split over my decision. The 10% of my mind dominated by emotion was adverse to the idea of taking another human life. I could maybe convince Wolf to spare them for more information. After all, 3 was better than 2, right? But the rest of me, the 90% of my being dictated by logic, knew that one way or another, I could not escape from taking a life. "Wait, don't dash," his female partner screamed. "Shut up." The boy yelled before looking at me. "I would rather die a shinobi of my village than a traitor who sells out its secrets. Now stop hesitating, you fucking twat." "As you wish," I thought before pulling out a kunai and running my lightning technique through it before plunging knife into his neck. The lightning easily made its way into his body and brain, killing him instantly, yet a smug grin was ever present on his face. I watched as the light left his eyes and his body slumped forward. Dead. Fatal. Rock Shinobi 1M. Level 43. HP, 0/20,000. You have gained 4,300 EXP. I ignored the wail of sorrow of the IWA kunoichi as my brows furrowed. My knife-wielding arm shook, so I took a breath and forced it to stop as Gamer's mind kept my bubbling emotions stable. With that, I dropped the knife and gazed upon the first life I had taken. before my attention was brought back by the angry curses of his teammate. I looked to her, seeing her eyes red. "You killed Sorrow." So that was his name. I thought before standing up and dusting myself. And you would have done the same to me. I could hear her grind her teeth before feeling her gaze bore into me as is trying to memorize every single detail on my body. "If I ever get out of here," she started, her voice slightly hitching, "I promise, I will kill you." I looked at her for a moment before turning my back and walking away. All is fair in love and war, and unfortunately, this is war, I muttered quietly. I untwined the strings from around the fingers of both my hands and walked past Wolf, uncaring about her reaction, and dropped them to the ground. "She can't move much and you're the one who wants to take her in for interrogation. She's your responsibility now." I couldn't tell if it was because she felt for me or because she simply didn't care, but regardless she didn't move to stop my departure, so I hopped into the trees and made my way out of that area. I made 2 shadow clones and had them go towards the direction where Dove and Turtle had run towards. By using Chakra sonar, I would be able to easily let Dove know I was alright and not in distress, but my other clone would have to physically find Turtle and let him know. With that done, I continued to jump around the area, looking to see if I could aid my allies elsewhere. I had absolute confidence in my teacher's ability to stay alive, not because of some misplaced faith, but because her stats were greater than those of the 2 enemy Jonin shinobi. As I traveled through the dense forest in the blanket of night, I thought about the IWA shinobi I had killed. I didn't feel regret for what I had done. After all, this was war, and they no doubt would have done the same thing. However, seeing the life fade from his eyes really opened mine to how fragile life really was. I knew that I didn't want to die as he had. I chose the same lifestyle he had, and so the only way that I could guarantee my life would be to get stronger, faster, smarter, and better. I needed to use all my abilities to my advantage and increase my repertoire of skills if I didn't want to die like Sorrow, killed by an enemy, because of his weakness and negligence. I suddenly stopped my movements as my chakra sonar pinged, and I received feedback of a group of 4 chakra signatures on the edge of my detection range heading in my direction, 3 familiar and 1 foreign, but familiar as well. In but a few seconds, they all arrived in front of me, noting that it was Boar and his shinobi. "So, you're still alive, kid?" The lead man, Boar, asked, though I could tell he seemed slightly sluggish. He seemed to be carrying a sack over his shoulder, while his 2 other teammates carried wounds all over their bodies. I responded with a nod, to which he sighed. "Your clone did good in leading those IWA shinobi towards us, and you've done well in keeping yourself alive, but I can tell you've had a long night," he stated as he looked straight into my eyes. How he could notice anything by only looking into my eyes from my mask was beyond me. I didn't reply, but I suppose I didn't need to. Boar carelessly took off the sack on his shoulder, allowing me to see that it was actually a constraint that was used to wrap up an individual. It's the sensor which was able to detect your clone. She apparently had splintered off the separate group of IWA Nin, the ones that your team had been facing. He then tossed the person at me, allowing me to notice that she was out cold. Before he continued, Wolf's group captured her, though they suffered heavy injuries, so we made clones to take them away. I looked at the tired but still well teammates of Boar and couldn't help but ask, "What happened?" The man sighed in exhaustion while his teammates seemed to shudder in anger. Wolf's team made contact with the enemy first, however they were very skilled and had more numbers. If not for the fact that Dove had left some clones with our teams and warned us ahead of time, Wolf's may not have survived at all. He didn't seem to want to explain any further, but I got the general gist of it. Wolf's team had probably held them off due to the fact that Dove's clone had helped allow them to prepare in time. They most likely managed to hold them off long enough, and maybe even killed a few, before Boar's squad got the jump on the rest. Well, that was my working theory based on the information I knew. Nevertheless, I focused on Boar as he continued to speak. "The IWA sensor might have some valuable information, so I need you to bring her back to base and make sure she is secured. My squad will patrol around and help out the rest of your group. We've already made contact with Dove, and aside from being a little bruised, she's alright. She should be looking for Turtle since he was out of her range. I thanked him for the information that assured me that my teammates were all right, before carrying the sack containing the IWA kunoichi in a bridal carry. "Take a break, kid, it's been a long night for all of us," was all Boar said before he nodded to his two companions and disappeared into the foliage, them two in tow. I looked at the direction they retreated to before my gaze focused in the direction of Kusa's main city. I hopped from tree to tree and made my way back to our base with the prisoner in my grasp. The woman was unconscious, so the journey was relatively quiet all the way through except for the occasional wolf howl and chirp of insects. Eventually, I arrived at our base of operations, and went to the first-floor lounging area where the earlier meeting was held. As I unceremoniously dumped the body of the IWA sensor on the couch, I noted that the other couches contained the downed forms of what seemed to be Wolf's comrades. They wore bloodied bandages that covered their bodies, and one of them had a wrapped-up stump on their right arm. It appeared as if Boar had done what he could to stabilize them, but I couldn't help but look at the stump that used to be a right arm. No wonder why Wolf seemed so vindictive when she appeared next to me. And in a single night, his career as a shinobi has been cut short. If this was Kodo lying down on that couch dash. You know it's not polite to stare. A voice rasped out, breaking me from my thoughts. The Konoha shinobi was looking at me with a strained smile, while cold sweat dribbled down his head. It was the first time I had seen him without his mask, so I returned the courtesy and removed my ANBU mask. "Ha, if you think that's bad, you should take a look at what I did to the other guy. Don't think she's going to be moving at all without half her body." He suddenly coughed and I hastily moved forward, my hands glowing green, in order to stabilize his condition. It seems like you were taught pretty well, kid, be grateful to your teacher." He then broke out into another coughing fit as I tried to heal him. Mystic Palm Technique, active, LVL 20, 75.86%. The mystical palm technique is a medical ninjutsu which allows the user to speed up the body's natural healing process by sending chakra from their hands into a wound or affected body part. It is vital to match the amount of chakra used to the severity of the affliction or injury, which requires a great amount of chakra control. 200% increase to HP regen. Don't move too much, you're seriously injured. I stayed quietly before looking at the other injured individual who looked to be unconscious, but less injured. You should rest up and conserve your energy. The guy forcefully made himself sit up on the couch, and I had to support him lest he reopen his wounds. Noting my annoyed look at his stubbornness, he smirked. "No can do, kid, I feel like if I close my eyes, I might not open them again," he finished tiredly. I took a good look at his face. He had a slim build, but was above average in height. His face seemed to be the one where you would only look once or twice before forgetting, making him perfect for infiltration. His eyes were a cloudy gray while he had a mop of short black spiky hair in his head. He looked at his sleeping partner and snorted, "That guy's suffering more from chakra exhaustion than anything else, but he's pretty banged up as well. Make sure he's not dead or something." I inwardly rolled my eyes and healed what I could with my little mastery over the mystic palm technique. His injuries were somewhat lighter than the other guys, but were still serious. Other than that, he still had all his limbs and wasn't covered in as many bloodied bandages, so he should be fine. The gray-eyed ninja looked at me in gratitude before turning his gaze towards the still unconscious IWA kunoichi and sneered, "Remind me to thank Dove when she gets back. If it wasn't for her clone warning us in advance." He grasped the empty spot that used to contain his hand. I would have lost more than just a hand. "What happened?" I asked curiously. The guy shook his head before leaning into the couch and patting his missing limb. "To sum it up, Dove's clone alerted us to the fact that there were a lot of enemies coming our way with your clone in tow, so we had time to set up some traps. Problem was that they had a sensor as well." He stayed looking at our captive. "They knew where we were, so some of our traps lost their effectiveness. However, worst of all was that there was a couple of IWA explosion core shinobi in that group." He glanced at his right hand and bandaged body self-depreciatively. "That bitch caught me by surprise when she blew my arm off, but I cut her in half, so I think it was a fair trade." He sighed lightly and grimaced from his wounds. In the end, we managed to hold them off until Boar and his boys arrived. A couple of heads and an unconscious enemy ninja later. He looked at the ninja I had brought in. "Well, here we are." He finished, looked at the room mockingly. I couldn't really understand how he felt, but I knew that being handicapped for the rest of your life wasn't really an experience anyone would want to go through. "Don't look like that, kid, all that matters is that we're in one piece." He then looked at his stump. "Well, mostly anyway." At my raised brow he shrugged. "Well, point is that we're tough, especially my captain." He whistled in appreciation. "Man, if it wasn't for the fact that she could kick my ass sideways, I would so try to tap that." The woman took on 3 of them at once yet still came out unscathed. Damn, how I want to just bend her over and dash. "What exactly are you teaching a child, Shark?" A feminine voice sounded. The gray-eyed man widened his eyes in recognition, horror, and nervousness. "See, Captain? How long have you been here?" "That's unimportant," Wolf stated before dropping a body that she had been carrying. It moved and raised its head before taking a look at its surroundings. Her hands and feet were bound tightly and her mouth was gagged. When she looked at me, her eyes narrowed and she snarled at me in hatred. "What took you so long?" I asked blandly. Wolf gazed at me before replying. "Well, as soon as you released her, she tried to run. Wasn't much of a problem since she was half dead, but delayed me nonetheless." I raised a brow as she continued. "Then I tried to be nice by keeping her conscious, but her kicking and screaming all the way made it less manageable for me." Shark snickered as he looked at the bondage's form of the IWA ninja. "Damn, Captain, I didn't know that tying up little girls was your thing." "And I didn't know that you were a little girl," was her calm reply. Shark looked at her oddly. "But I'm not." "Then I'll make you one if you don't keep quiet." That shut him up. Wolf gave the sensor ninja I had brought it a once-over before she stated. I also made contact with Turtle, and other than being a little banged up, he's in good condition. The others should be here soon, so in the meantime relax here, I'm going to scout a little bit more. Without waiting for any reply of confirmation, the woman body flickered out of the room. Isn't she just charming? Sure. This has been an interesting night, huh? Our first night, and we already get to experience the joys of the front lines in full. Kodo stated as we bathed in the mixed bath hot springs of Kusa, a towel covering most of her up. And the kid made it out in one piece as well. Good for you. Turtle stated as he leaned on the edge of the springs, a small towel covering up his essential components. I, on the other hand, was in my birthday suit. There was sadly nothing to see down there for me anyway. So, I had a towel on my head, but nothing else. It's important to note that this was the first time I had ever seen Turtle without his mask, and so I had taken a look at him. Silver hair, blue eyes, fair skin, and an above-average height were the first adjectives that came to mind, and he was built like a runner, which fit with his specialty. Thanks, I said quietly. After Wolf had left Shark and me at the building, I had decided to continue working on my Mystic Palm technique on the 2-test Dumb Leaf Shinobi in order to improve my skills. I took Shark's words to heart when he told me about his "this could save my life one day," and since I had nothing better to do till the rest of the Konoha ninja arrived, why not practice my life-saving skill? Turtle looked at me for a moment and sighed, "But to think that you already..." He shook his head and his brown eyes stared into my silver ones. "How are you feeling, kid?" I'm fine, I replied blandly. And that's all that matters. Kodo stepped in, looking at me seriously and bringing me closer to her. "I can't say that I appreciate Wolf making you do that, but it's a hurdle you would have had to pass sooner or later, and trust me, the sooner the better." When everyone reconvened back to the base, Wolf had gone ahead and done whatever it was she did in order to get information from her captives. That place apparently had soundproof rooms that could be used for those purposes, or ones more carnal. The moment that Turtle and Dove had arrived, they had somehow instantly known that I had taken a life. As a result, they had come up with the idea of bringing me someplace relaxing, and so here I was. That did get me wondering though. How does everyone figure that out as soon as they look at me? I asked. Boar had figured it out as soon as he looked at me, and that was when I had my ANBU mask on. I had no doubt that Shark also realized something, but he didn't really say anything, and now Turtle and Kodo had realized as soon as they saw me. Turtle looked to me seriously before replying, "It's the eyes, kid, windows to the soul and all that." I gave him a dull look. "That sounds like bullshit." Kodo promptly flicked my head. "Language." I gave her a slightly annoyed look. "It's fine if I kill, but the moment I curse I've apparently committed a grave sin." "I don't understand your logic." "Don't try to." Turtle stated, shaking his head, "Women are complex creatures and trying to decipher them is like trying to understand Fuinjutsu. Only a unique individual with a special bloodline can ever hope to accomplish such an incredible feat." Kodo looked at him in annoyance before bringing me closer and stating seriously, "He's somewhat right though." She started, pulling me closer. "Your hand is shaking." I looked down at the hand I had used to take a life and noted that it was indeed slightly vibrating under the warm water, causing ripples to form. I guess that 10% part of me is still upset. I thought as I willed my arm to stop shaking. Kodo wrapped her hands around me and whispered softly, "I can't say it gets easier from here because, however, do remember that I am always here for you." Softly, I replied, "Thank you." Kodo smiled while Turtle nodded his head, and we stayed like this in silence for a while, the only sound being that of the flowing warm water and the other people in the background. This half of the water seems more lively. "Mind if I join?" a voice called out. The individual was a woman of around 5 feet 8 inches in height with blonde hair, sky blue eyes, and an amazing figure. It was Wolf. I kind of understand Shark now, too bad I'm too young. If I had to rate her, I would say that she was around a 9.2 out of 10, just slightly lower than my beautiful 9.4 out of 10 teacher. Kodo looked at her for a moment before she shrugged, "Suit yourself." Wolf sat down in the water next to us, her jugs floating in the water. It was important to mention that she was in her birthday suit as well, and no one seemed to care. Everyone was more or less professional about it, so I didn't bother with it. Besides, I had seen my teacher naked hundreds of times. There was a short silence before the woman asked, "How are you feeling, kid?" I looked at her from on top of Kodo's lap, my silver eyes half-lidded, before I replied, "I'm all right." The blue-eyed woman looked at me for a while before inquiring, "Your body doesn't seem to think so." I followed her gaze to my right hand and noted that it was shaking again. I gripped it tightly with my left hand and replied apathetically, "Mostly all right." Without warning, I was suddenly carried away from Kodo and found my head resting against the soft sensation of fleshy orbs. Kodo didn't move to take me back. Instead, she looked at Wolf deeply before motioning to Turtle, after which they both moved away. "Do you know how I felt after I killed a man for the first time?" I shook my head, to which she wrapped her hands around me and brought me closer. "Nothing." I blinked at her reply and continued to listen. "I think I lost something that day, however, seeing you today, after your first kill." She paused, resting a chin on my head. I remembered that time. She used her hand to pry away my left hand from holding my right as she continued, "Don't fight this feeling because it shows that you still have something in you, kid. Just live with it. I think it might be healthier, but don't take my word for it as I'll never truly know." I gripped my right fist as it continued shaking and relaxed my body against her chest. Eventually, Kodo and Turtle came back to this area, after which Wolf went back to her little area that she was relaxing in. After we had enough time of communication and relaxation, we made our way back to our residence and went to bed, the fatigue from the events of the night catching up with us. I slept with Kodo, not because I couldn't sleep by myself, but because I simply didn't want to. And with that, I drifted off into sleep. It had been a long night. That's it for this reading. Hit like and subscribe for a free ticket pass going to the different worlds of anime fanfiction. Looking forward to having you on board again.